My parents publicly humiliated me at their lavish anniversary dinner, screaming that I was an unemployed, pathetic medical school dropout who was a permanent stain on our family's pristine legacy. They had absolutely no idea that I was already quietly sitting on a personal net worth of $56.8 million. And my ultimate revenge wouldn't just be exposing the truth to the world, it would be legally purchasing the very building that housed their elite medical practice and handing them a 90-day eviction notice. My name is Elias Thorne, I am 27 years old. On the 10th of April 2024, at exactly 8:15 p.m., my father turned our family's extravagant 40th wedding anniversary dinner into a brutal, calculated public execution in front of 22 of our closest relatives and friends. He stood at the head of a massive, candlelit dining table in a rented Gold Coast ballroom, pointed his trembling finger directly at the exit, and roared, "Get out and stay out. You are a complete disgrace to the Thorne name." He humiliated me, laughing at my life choices and calling me a total parasite while the rest of my family sat there in icy, approving silence. But there was one massive, world-altering secret they did not know. They thought they were throwing a lazy, unemployed medical school dropout out onto the freezing Chicago streets, completely unaware that I was already a multi-millionaire tech founder. And right now, as I speak to you, those very same people who discarded me like absolute trash are desperately begging for my mercy. To understand why my father's hatred for me ran so incredibly deep, you have to understand the oppressive, toxic legacy of the Thorne family. We were a dynasty built on scalpels, massive egos, and conditional love. My father, Dr. Arthur Thorne, is one of the top 5 orthopedic surgeons in the nation. My mother, Dr. Eleanor Thorne, is a highly prominent plastic surgeon whose private patient list is a revolving door of wealthy politicians and old money socialites. In our family, your worth as a human being was strictly determined by whether or not you wore a pristine white lab coat. Naturally, my older brother Vance, 34, embraced the family cult completely. He was a rising star cardiothoracic surgeon, incredibly brilliant but deeply narcissistic. My younger brother Oliver, 24, was currently in his final grueling year at Johns Hopkins Medical School, terrified of my father's temper and blindly compliant. Then there was me. The glitch in the perfect matrix. On the 14th of October 2022, right in the middle of my incredibly stressful third year at Northwestern University's medical program, I walked away from it all. I packed up my heavy anatomy textbooks, withdrew from my courses, and dropped out completely. My parents never asked why. They never asked if I was burned out or depressed. They immediately jumped to the most self-serving conclusion. I was weak, lazy, and couldn't handle the pressure. For 2 excruciatingly long years, I became the official ghost at every mandatory family gathering. My mother would wave her diamond-ringed hand dismissively when her friends asked about me, saying with heavy air quotes, "Elias is still just times figuring things out." They assumed I was wasting away in my apartment playing video games. Here is the massive reality they completely missed. I left medical school because I had discovered a completely different world. While my exhausted classmates were destroying their mental health memorizing cranial nerves, I was spending 18 hours a day fiercely teaching myself advanced blockchain architecture and AI-driven security protocols. I took exactly $65,000, my entire life savings from summer software internships, plus a small inheritance from my late grandfather, and aggressively invested in the cryptocurrency market during a massive global crash. I traded with cold, calculated algorithmic discipline. I partnered with a brilliant anonymous developer named Kale, and together we built Sentinel Node, a highly advanced decentralized security protocol designed to protect multi-million-dollar decentralized finance transactions from sophisticated cyber attacks. By April 2024, my personal, highly diversified financial portfolio sat at an astonishing $56.8 million. But I never whispered a single word of this immense wealth to my family. I let them keep their desperate illusion of superiority. When they looked at me, they saw a pathetic guy in faded sweatpants. They didn't see the high-tech mission control center in my apartment, or the fact that I was closing massive private licensing agreements while they slept. The only person who treated me like a human being was my Uncle Silas, my father's younger brother who had wisely walked away from the toxic hospital grind years ago. He was the only one who asked about my work with genuine curiosity. The countdown to the ultimate explosion began 2 weeks before the anniversary dinner. My mother called my personal phone, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Elias, darling," she cooed. "It's our 40th anniversary coming up. We are hosting a beautiful dinner. Your father and I would absolutely love it if you were there." And I knew exactly how she operated. She needed an audience to witness some brand new family triumph, and she needed me there to act as the perfect miserable contrast to Vance's glowing success. I agreed to go, keeping my voice utterly devoid of emotion. When I arrived at the lavish ballroom at exactly 8 p.m., the entire space was glowing with expensive ambient light. My mother air-kissed my cheeks, careful not to let her makeup touch my skin, and quickly guided me past the main grand table. Table 1 was explicitly reserved for the family elite. Table 2 was a small, cramped folding table shoved deep into a dark corner near the kitchen doors. I read the name cards. They belonged to 4 of my much younger cousins, 1 random aunt, and me. I was a 27-year-old multimillionaire CEO, and my own mother was deliberately seating me at the children's table. "It's much more comfortable for you over here, dear," she whispered with a sharp, terrifyingly fake smile before walking away. The translation was painfully obvious: keep your mouth shut and stay out of the photos. I sat down in the cramped chair. An 8-year-old cousin immediately spilled dark pomegranate juice directly onto the sleeve of my shirt. I kept my face perfectly neutral, wiped the juice away, and made a silent, unbreakable vow to myself right then and there: this is the absolute last time these people will ever treat me like this. At exactly 8:38 p.m., my father tapped his crystal wine glass to command the room's absolute attention. "Tonight, we are celebrating not just 40 beautiful years of marriage," he announced, his chest puffed out, "but we are also celebrating some monumental news. My brilliant son, Vance, has officially received an invitation to serve as the keynote speaker at the International Surgical Congress in Geneva this coming fall. At 34, he will be the youngest keynote speaker in their history." The room erupted into loud gasps and thunderous applause. Vance stood up, adjusting his tailored suit, soaking it up like a conquering hero. The applause lasted exactly 25 seconds. When the noise finally faded, the trap was sprung. My father turned his body, his eyes locking directly onto me across the room. A cruel, calculated smile spread across his face. "Elias," his voice carried across the dead silent room. "We are all sharing our family accomplishments tonight. What about you? Have you achieved anything at all worth sharing? Or are you still just relaxing at home?" 22 pairs of eyes instantly snapped over to stare directly at me. The 15-year-old cousin next to me physically leaned away as if my failure was contagious. My throat was bone dry, but I kept my voice perfectly, chillingly calm. "I work full-time in fintech, Dad. I build decentralized blockchain security protocols." My father let out a sharp, dismissive bark of laughter. "Blockchain? Give me a break, Elias. That isn't a real profession. That's just glorified gambling for lazy millennials who don't want to do a hard day's work." Several uncles chuckled in agreement. "It's a highly secure, legitimate global financial infrastructure," I said quietly, refusing to break eye contact. "It's a complete joke," my father roared, suddenly slamming his fist flat onto the table. The silverware violently jumped. "You threw away a massive Ivy League medical education. Money that came directly out of your college fund, and you threw it all away to sit in your dark room wearing sweatpants and playing with imaginary digital coins. You are an absolute disgrace to the Thorn name." My mother leaned forward, her voice a terrifying icy whisper that cut straight to the bone. "We can't even tell our friends what you do, Elias. It makes us look like failures. Get out of my event," my father bellowed, pointing at the heavy oak doors. "Get out and stay out. I will not have a pathetic failure living under the shadow of my name for another second." Nobody moved. Not a single soul stood up to defend me. I slowly stood up from the children's table, grabbed my coat, and walked toward the door. As my hand touched the brass doorknob, I heard my mother whisper, "Let him go. He'll come crawling back begging for a handout within a week." I stepped out into the freezing Chicago wind and walked to my midnight blue Aston Martin. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. My breathing remained perfectly calm because I possessed a singular piece of knowledge that changed the entire dynamic of power. I held a royal flush, and my family was betting their entire reputation on a pair of twos. Update 1. The first 14 days following my brutal public eviction were characterized by an absolute, deafening silence. Not a single text from my father, not a single call from my mother. They were playing a toxic game of chicken, completely convinced that the harsh reality of being cut off from their wealth would break my spirit. On the third day, my younger brother Oliver sent me a pathetic, spineless text: "Elias, sorry about Dad at the dinner, but I can't get involved. I have residency applications and can't afford to have him turn on me." I deleted the message without replying. He had chosen his side to protect his inheritance. On the fourth day, Vance posted a massive, heavily curated photo gallery of the dinner on Instagram. He had carefully and maliciously cropped the images so that I was completely erased from the background. While they were obsessing over Instagram filters, my actual life was scaling at a terrifying, unstoppable speed. On day 10, I walked into an ultra-modern glass-walled boardroom in the downtown Loop and officially closed a massive Series A funding deal with one of the most aggressive venture capital firms in the city. The senior partner, a brilliant woman named Miranda, leaned back in her expensive leather chair after signing the contracts. "Elias, you've built an absolute tech monster here. We are looking at a hard company valuation of $220 million. You are about to dominate this sector." I walked out of that building feeling like a completely different person. Every single night, I would log into a secure back-end portal. I was counting down the hours. On day 18, the very first massive crack in my family's wall of ignorance appeared. A highly influential tech blogger leaked a partial, unformatted text list of the upcoming Times Fortune 40 Under 40 Times Tech and Finance category. My name, Elias Thorne, was sitting right near the very top. Within an hour, my professional inbox exploded with congratulatory messages from prominent venture capitalists and hedge fund managers. Wall Street knew exactly who I was. But, my arrogant family, who only read medical journals, was still entirely in the dark. On day 20, the heavy silence from my family was finally broken. My phone buzzed. It was my mother. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Elias," she stammered, her voice completely lacking its usual dictatorial authority. She sounded intensely anxious. "Are you doing all right?" "I'm perfectly fine, Eleanor. Why are you calling?" She cleared her throat nervously. "A few of your father's high-ranking colleagues at the hospital. Well, they've been asking some very strange questions about you today. They mentioned seeing your name attached to some major financial news online. Your father was very confused. Elias, please tell me, are you wrapped up in some kind of horrible legal trouble? Are you facing a lawsuit?" She literally could not fathom a reality where my name was in the news for something positive. "Everything is absolutely perfect," I said, a cold smile spreading across my face. "Well, good," she said, sounding highly suspicious. "Anyway, we are planning a family gathering next month and we expect you to." "No," I cut her off instantly. "I will not be attending. This conversation is over." I hung up the phone and ignored her frantic callbacks. The ground was shifting beneath her feet, but she had no idea how massive the impending earthquake truly was. 5 days later, at exactly 6 a.m., on April 25, the official Times Fortune Times article dropped. The banner graphic dominated the internet. Right front and center was a high-resolution portrait of me in a sharp-tailored suit, looking directly into the camera. The bold headline read, "From medical school dropout to $56.8 million tech titan, meet Elias Thorne, the architect behind Sentinel Node." The journalist had done a spectacular job. They detailed my entire journey, explicitly mentioning how I walked away from a highly prestigious medical dynasty to build my empire from scratch with my own savings. It was irrefutable proof that I was not a parasite. I was a pioneer. I later found out exactly how the news hit my father, and the story belongs in a museum. Dr. Arthur Thorne was sitting in the doctor's lounge at his elite hospital, boasting to junior surgeons about Vance's upcoming keynote speech. Suddenly, the chief of staff walked into the lounge holding an iPad, looking directly at my father with a wide, impressed smile. "Arthur, you sly old fox." The chief boomed. "Why the hell have you been keeping this a secret? This is absolutely incredible news." My father looked deeply confused. "What are you talking about? Vance's keynote?" "No, not Vance." The chief laughed, handing the iPad directly to my father. "Elias, your youngest boy. He's on the front page of Fortune this morning. The kid is a literal multimillionaire tech founder. You must be incredibly proud." My father looked down at the glowing screen. He saw my face. He saw the headline. He saw the number. $56.8 million. According to a nurse who witnessed it, all the color instantly drained from my father's face. His hands began to shake so violently he nearly dropped the tablet. He could not form a single coherent sentence. His entire worldview shattered in real time in front of his esteemed colleagues. He had spent years telling these people I was a lazy failure. Now, his boss was congratulating him on my massive triumph. Meanwhile, Vance was having a complete psychological breakdown. His direct messages were flooded with links to the article from his own medical school friends, completely ignoring his surgical achievements and asking if he could introduce them to his billionaire brother. In a single morning, I had completely eclipsed the golden child. Update 2. The real public humiliation for my parents hadn't even peaked yet. If there is one thing you need to understand about textbook narcissists, it's that they absolutely cannot stand being on the wrong side of public opinion. As the article spread like wildfire, my mother panicked. At exactly 2 p.m., she launched a massive damage control campaign on her public Facebook page. She wrote a sickeningly sweet, entirely fabricated essay. "Words cannot express how incredibly proud Arthur and I are of our youngest son, Elias. When he made the difficult decision to leave medical school, many didn't understand his vision. But as parents, we always knew he was destined for greatness in tech. We proudly supported him during those long nights of coding. Seeing him recognized by Fortune today is the ultimate validation of our unwavering belief in him. We love you, Elias. Number proud parents." She tagged me and linked the article. Within minutes, her high society friends were flooding the comments, praising her for being such a progressive, supportive mother. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. She was actively trying to steal the credit for the success she had viciously mocked. But she made one fatal miscalculation. She forgot about Aunt Vivian. Aunt Vivian had been sitting quietly at that disastrous anniversary dinner. She possessed a strong moral compass and a severe distaste for public hypocrisy. 45 minutes after my mother posted her fake tribute, Aunt Vivian completely destroyed her in the comments section. Vivian didn't write an argument, she simply uploaded 4 screenshots from the private family group chat, taken just days after the dinner. Screenshot 1, my mother writing, Elias is an absolute parasite. He is a total embarrassment to this family. Screenshot 2, Arthur finally kicked him out at the dinner. Thank God. Let the ungrateful brat see what the real world is like without our money. He'll be begging us for a handout by Monday. Aunt Vivian added a single razor-sharp caption. Supportive Eleanor? You literally threw him out of a ballroom 2 weeks ago because you hated his job. Stop lying to the internet for social points. The internet is undefeated. People began sharing the screenshots to Twitter, tagging my mother's hospital, dragging her name through the digital mud. Her wealthy friends rapidly deleted their comments. The public humiliation was so intense that within 2 hours, my mother completely panicked and permanently deactivated her entire Facebook account. But I wasn't done. I didn't celebrate with a party. My retaliation was completely silent, entirely strategic, and infinitely more painful. I used my wealth as a highly sharpened weapon. First, I directed my company's philanthropic arm to donate a clean $7 million to the university I had dropped out of, with a legally binding stipulation. The funds were exclusively earmarked for the computer science programs. Absolutely $0 were allowed to cross over to the medical school. Second, my father's elite private hospital was running a massive fundraising campaign for a new wing. Instead of writing a check to his facility, I publicly donated $3.5 million in cutting-edge medical equipment to a severely underfunded, heavily neglected public rival clinic located just across the city. The press release read, Tech CEO, Elias Thorne, pledges $3.5 million to support public healthcare equity. The message to the medical community was deafeningly clear. The multimillionaire's son refused to give a single dime to his own father's hospital. Dr. Arthur Thorne's board of directors was reportedly furious with him. But the final, absolute killing blow was something they never saw coming. My parents ran their highly lucrative, private concierge clinics out of a prestigious, ultra-luxury commercial medical plaza in the Gold Coast. They didn't own their office spaces, they leased them for astronomical monthly rates. Using a newly formed anonymous holding company called Obsidian Capital, I quietly initiated a massive real estate acquisition. I bought the entire commercial building for $18.5 million in cash. The ink dried on the deed on a Tuesday. On Wednesday morning, my corporate lawyers hand-delivered formal legal notices to my parents' clinical offices. As the new owner of the building, I was formally declining to renew their commercial leases. They were given exactly 90 days to vacate the premises and relocate their entire luxury practice. That specific move finally broke their stubborn pride. They could no longer pretend I didn't exist. I held their actual livelihood in the palm of my hand. On a rainy Thursday evening, the private intercom in my 70th floor penthouse chimed. It was the head doorman. Mr. Thorne, I apologize for the disturbance, but there is a couple in the lobby claiming to be your parents. They are demanding to be let up. A cold smile spread across my face. They had swallowed their massive pride and dragged themselves to my doorstep. Send them up, I replied calmly, but have security stand by in the hallway. A few minutes later, my father and mother stepped into my massive, high-ceiling entry foyer. They immediately stopped in their tracks, completely overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the luxury. They looked incredibly small and deeply uncomfortable. Elias, my mother started, forcing a terrible, trembling smile. She was holding a box of expensive pastries. A pathetic peace offering. Your home is breathtaking, darling. Why are you here? I asked, my voice completely flat. I did not offer them a seat. My father cleared his throat, desperately trying to summon his old commanding tone, but it failed completely. Elias, son, we need to talk. This entire situation has gotten out of hand. The public spectacle, the donations. And now this ridiculous stunt with our office building lease. It is reflecting very poorly on the family. We are willing to let bygones be bygones. We want you to come back to the family dinners. We need to present a united front. A united front, I repeated slowly. You stood in a ballroom a month ago, and screamed at me to get out and stay out. You called me a parasite. We were just worried about your future. My mother lied smoothly. We were trying to protect you through tough love. You weren't trying to protect me, Eleanor, I said, dropping the title of mom completely. She flinched. You only care about me now because my net worth exceeds your entire life's work, and because I literally own the roof over your medical practice. You didn't come here to apologize. You came here to do damage control. Now listen here, Elias, my father snapped, a brief flash of his old anger returning. I am still your father. You owe this family some basic respect. You are deliberately trying to humiliate me, and you cannot evict us from a building we've operated in for a decade. I set my glass of water down on the marble counter with a sharp clack. I looked my father dead in the eye, and for the first time in my life, I saw genuine, undeniable fear staring back at me. He realized he had absolutely no leverage. I don't owe you a damn thing, Arthur, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. You made your choice very clear at that dinner. You chose your ego. You chose your precious legacy. Well, you have it. If you do not vacate my building in 90 days, I will have the sheriffs physically remove your medical equipment and leave it on the sidewalk. And if you ever show up at my home uninvited again, I will file a massive harassment lawsuit against you. Do you understand me? They stared at me in complete, stunned silence. The power dynamic had permanently, irreversibly shifted. Get out of my house, I commanded, perfectly echoing his words from a month prior. And stay out. They turned around and walked out the door in absolute silence. As the heavy door clicked shut behind them, I felt a massive, invisible weight completely lift off my chest. I systematically blocked every single toxic relative and opportunistic leech from my phone. I only kept Kale and Uncle Silas in my life. The ultimate revenge against a narcissistic family is not a screaming match. It is radical indifference. It is living a massive, joyful life completely outside of their control, while legally evicting them from your property. My brother screamed that I stole the six-figure tech job he had always wanted, and my father backed him up by shattering my car window in front of my crying children. They thought they could bully me into surrendering our late mother's cabin to fund my brother's latest failed startup. Instead, I handed my lawyer a decade's worth of meticulously organized receipts, watched their fraudulent lawsuit collapse in real time, and legally exiled them from my life forever. I am a 35-year-old single father to two incredible kids, Chloe, 9, and Noah, 6. For as long as I can remember, my life has been defined by a single, inescapable dynamic. I was the scapegoat, and my older brother Marcus was the untouchable golden child. Our childhood home wasn't a family, it was a monarchy, and Marcus was the crown prince. If Marcus brought home a C on his report card, Dad would march down to the school and scream at the teacher for failing to recognize his unique learning style. If I brought home a flawless A, Dad would squint at the paper and interrogate me about who I copied from. When Marcus was caught shoplifting in high school, Dad laughed it off as a harmless prank, a boy just pushing boundaries. When I was 10 and accidentally spilled juice on the living room rug, I was grounded for a month and forced to scrub the floors until my knuckles bled. I learned very early on that fairness was a myth, but I made a silent vow to myself, I would never become like them. The divide in our family turned into a permanent chasm when I was 11. My mother passed away after a brutal, agonizing battle with breast cancer. She was the only buffer between me and Dad's overwhelming favoritism. After her funeral, the house grew incredibly cold. I vividly remember standing just outside the kitchen door a few days after we buried her, clutching a glass of water. I heard Dad muttering to his brother, "At least she got to leave. Now I'm stuck dealing with the quiet one." Whether he knew I was standing right there in the shadows never mattered. That was the exact moment I realized I was entirely on my own. I decided then and there that I would build a life completely separate from his toxic shadow, even if a pathetic, desperate part of me still spent years hoping he would eventually wake up and love me. I married young, desperate to create the family I never had. We had Chloe, and 3 years later, Noah. Unfortunately, their mother realized shortly after Noah's birth that she simply wasn't cut out for parenthood. She packed her bags, admitted her truth, and left. It was a crushing blow, but I respected her honesty. From that day forward, it was just the three of us against the world. I worked grueling hours in a mid-level tech support role, taking on exhausting freelance coding and software architecture jobs late into the night just to keep a roof over our heads in Chicago. Marcus, meanwhile, bounced from one spectacularly doomed business venture to another. Dad enthusiastically emptied his hard-earned retirement savings to fund every single one of Marcus's million-dollar ideas. There was the artisanal organic dog food delivery service that went bankrupt in 3 months. There was the catastrophic cryptocurrency app that resulted in a minor fraud investigation. Every single failure was miraculously someone else's fault. The market, the investors, the developers, and every single financial bailout came directly from Dad's pocket. I never asked either of them for a dime. I paid my own way through community college, worked overnight shifts stocking shelves at a grocery store, contributed heavily to complex open-source software projects in my rare spare time, and focused entirely on providing for Chloe and Noah. Eventually, all those sleepless nights staring at lines of code paid off. A major, prestigious software firm contacted me out of the blue about leading a massive regional AI development project. At first, I thought the email was a sophisticated phishing scam. But after 6 grueling weeks of intense interviews, brutal technical assessments, and panel meetings, they formally offered me the position. It was a life-changing offer, a high 6-figure salary, phenomenal health benefits, full relocation support if I wanted it, and flexible remote work so I could continue to be a present, active father to my kids. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the digital offer letter while Chloe and Noah built a fort out of couch cushions in the living room. For the first time in my entire life, I let myself believe that my endless grinding and sacrifices actually meant something. I waited a full 24 hours before calling Dad. Experience had taught me to keep my expectations buried deep beneath the earth, but a small, foolish part of me thought this might be the achievement that finally made him proud. I called him on a Tuesday evening. "Dad, I just got offered an incredible lead developer position at company," I said, my voice trembling slightly with excitement. Before I could even finish my sentence, the line went dead silent. Then, he interrupted, his voice sharp and suspicious. "Wait. Is this the same tech firm Marcus applied to last month?" My stomach instantly plummeted into my shoes. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I didn't know Marcus applied there," I stammered. Dad went quiet again. When he finally spoke, his tone was dripping with venom. "They turned him down on Friday, but they hired you? How does that make any sense?" Another suffocating silence. Finally, he muttered, "They told him they were looking for someone with more open source leadership. You must have manipulated them. Don't let this fluke go to your head, Lucas." Click. He hung up. No congratulations, no pride. Just immediate, burning resentment that I had succeeded where his golden child had failed. I sat the phone down, feeling physically nauseous. I promised myself right then that I was done. I was never going to spend another second of my life chasing the ghost of his approval. The following Sunday was our mandatory, once-a-month family lunch at a local diner. I was inches away from canceling, but I refused to hide. Chloe and Noah genuinely loved seeing their grandfather, and I wanted to give them one normal afternoon. I dressed them in their Sunday best and drove to the restaurant, bracing myself for the inevitable. We sat in the vinyl booth. Marcus barely looked up from his menu before sneering. "Hope you're enjoying the job you stole from me." I didn't flinch. I looked him dead in the eye. "I didn't steal anything, Marcus, I earned it." He let out a loud, mocking laugh that made several other patrons turn their heads. "You earned it? Please, you just got lucky. You probably told them some sob story about being a single dad to get pity points." Dad leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms comfortably. "Marcus was undoubtedly their first choice, Lucas. You just fit some diversity quota or they wanted someone cheaper. They made their decision," I replied, keeping my voice terrifyingly calm. "They hired the person they believed was technically qualified to lead a multi-million-dollar project." Marcus's face twisted into an ugly snarl. "You think you're better than me now? You think because you sit at a computer all day you're suddenly the man of the house?" "No," I answered, my heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm in my chest. "I think the company evaluated our respective resumes, looked at my 10 years of actual coding experience versus your string of bankruptcies, and made the logical choice. I'm not apologizing for my success." Dad slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. "You've always been an arrogant, selfish little brat. You should have withdrawn your application the second you knew your brother was in the running." Normally, the old Lucas would have swallowed the burning insult. I would have looked down at my plate, apologized to keep the peace, and let them trample all over my dignity. But as I looked at my son Noah, who was staring at me with wide, terrified eyes, something inside me permanently snapped. "No, Dad," I said, my voice dangerously low. "I have spent 35 years staying quiet while you excused every single failure, lie, and theft Marcus ever committed. I have spent my entire life watching you dismiss every single thing I've ever accomplished. That ends right now." Today, the entire diner seemed to fall dead silent. Chloe stopped stirring her chocolate milk, sensing the massive shift in the atmosphere. I turned to my children, instantly softening my expression. "Come on, guys, we're leaving." I stood up, threw a $50 bill on the table to cover our untouched food, gathered my kids, and walked toward the exit. Behind me, Marcus shouted, "Yeah, run away and act dramatic like you always do, you coward." I didn't even turn my head. I pushed the heavy glass door open, and walked out into the crisp afternoon air. Driving home, the silence in the car was heavy. Chloe reached her little hand forward from the backseat and touched my shoulder. "Daddy, are you okay?" I looked at her beautiful, concerned face in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in decades, a genuine, unburdened smile spread across my face. "Yeah, sweetie, I finally am." Walking away didn't feel like a loss. It felt like I had just cut a massive, suffocating anchor from my neck. It felt like I was finally protecting my family. Update 1. The week following the diner incident was incredibly peaceful. I buried myself in wrapping up my old freelance contracts and preparing for my new role. Life felt infinitely lighter without the constant, looming dread of Dad's criticism or Marcus's passive-aggressive texts. One evening, while I was tucking Chloe into bed, she wrapped her arms tightly around my neck and whispered, "Daddy, you smile a lot more now. Your eyes look happy." I kissed her forehead and silently promised myself I would never let anyone take that peace away from us. 3 days later, that peace was violently interrupted. A loud, aggressive pounding echoed through my house. I checked the security camera app on my phone and saw Marcus standing on my porch, pacing like a caged animal. I opened the door but kept my body firmly blocking the threshold. "What do you want, Marcus?" I asked, my voice flat. He tried to brush past me, but I didn't budge an inch. He scoffed, looking over my shoulder at my modest living room. Not a bad setup for a guy who stole his brother's career, he muttered. Anyway, Dad's giving me the lake house. My stomach tightened into a painful knot. The cabin in Wisconsin? Yep, Marcus said, a smug, sickening grin spreading across his face. Signing the deed over to me next week. I've already got a buyer lined up. Going to use the cash to launch a new logistics startup. It's a guaranteed gold mine. That cabin had belonged to our mother's family for over 60 years. It was the only tangible piece of her we had left. More importantly, I had been the sole person maintaining it for the last decade. I had spent countless weekends up there. I personally replaced the rotting cedar roof shingles, overhauled the rusted plumbing, paid $18,500 out of my own pocket for a new foundation and water heater, and spent every spring clearing the property of winter debris. Marcus hadn't set foot on that property in 5 years. Dad says someone responsible needs the capital, and since you're so rich now, you don't need it. Marcus sneered, clearly waiting for me to explode. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I didn't plead. I just pointed a rigid finger toward the street. Get off my property, now. He chuckled, thinking I was bluffing. Or what? I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, letting the absolute zero in my eyes do the talking. Seriously, Marcus, leave. Right, now. Something in my posture must have finally convinced him that I wasn't the punching bag he grew up with. The smirk vanished. He took a step back, muttered a string of curses under his breath, and marched back to his car. I locked the deadbolt, turned around, and immediately knew exactly what my next move had to be. I wasn't going to sit at home and stew in anger. I grabbed my keys, told the babysitter I'd be back in an hour, and drove straight to Dad's house. I didn't knock. I used the spare key I still had and walked right into his living room. He was sitting in his worn recliner, watching a golf tournament. He jumped slightly when he saw me, immediately muttering, "You could have knocked. We need to talk. Right now," I demanded, standing tall in the center of the room. He muted the television, crossing his arms defensively. "If this is about the cabin, my mind is made up. Marcus just told me you're signing it over to him so he can sell it," I said, keeping my voice dangerously steady. "It's my property to do with as I please," Dad fired back. "It was Mom's family cabin first," I corrected him. "And I have been the only one maintaining it for 10 years, you know that." "That was your choice," he yelled, his face turning red. "Marcus needs this break. You have a 6-figure job, a house, and kids. Marcus is struggling. He needs the capital for his new business." "You mean his next failure?" I shot back before he could dodge the reality. "I have paid for the roof, the plumbing, the structural repairs, the insurance, the property taxes, and every single seasonal maintenance fee. Show me one single receipt with Marcus's name on it. Just one." Dad looked away, unable to meet my gaze, but quickly recovered his arrogant posture. "She isn't here anymore, Lucas. I'm making the decisions now. Your brother needs this, and you're going to stop being selfish and let him have it." The words landed exactly the way he intended, like a knife to the chest. Years ago, I would have cried. I would have argued until my throat was raw, begging him to see my worth, begging him to honor Mom's memory. Instead, I felt nothing but a cold, hard clarity. I nodded once, slowly. "I understand. I know exactly where we stand now." He frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. He was entirely prepared for a screaming match. He didn't know how to handle my icy acceptance. "That's it?" "That's it," I said, turning my back on him. "Lucas, don't make this into something it doesn't have to be," he called out as I reached the door. I paused, looking at him over my shoulder one last time. "No, Dad, you've been making this into a nightmare for 25 years. I'm just finally done pretending otherwise." I walked out and let the door click shut behind me. I drove straight home. I didn't panic. I went directly to the heavy steel filing cabinet in my home office. Inside were 10 years of meticulous, obsessive records. Every single receipt for roofing materials, every invoice from the plumbers, every property tax payment I had made on Dad's behalf, every insurance document, every bank statement, and hundreds of time-stamped photographs I had taken after completing repairs. I carried the heavy boxes to the dining room and spread the thousands of documents across the large mahogany table. Chloe wandered in, holding her stuffed bear, her eyes wide at the sea of paper. "What are you doing, Daddy? Are you doing homework?" I smiled, pulling out an empty binder. "Actually, sweetie, I'm organizing some very important history." "Do you want to help me?" For the next 4 hours, Chloe handed me plastic sleeves while Noah stacked photographs into neat, chronological piles. They had no idea they were helping me build the legal weapon that would eventually secure their grandmother's legacy. The very next morning, I called Mr. Vance, a ruthless, highly recommended real estate and estate litigation attorney my new boss had referred me to. I sat in his plush downtown office and laid out my situation. I didn't want to sue for money. I just wanted to know if I had any legal standing to block the sale of a property I had single-handedly preserved. Mr. Vance listened in absolute silence for 20 minutes. When I finished, He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. Do you have documentation proving these financial contributions? I pulled out my phone and showed him the pictures of the dining room table, covered in 20 boxes worth of organized receipts and invoices totaling tens of thousands of dollars. A slow, predatory smile spread across Mr. Vance's face. Excellent. Do not confront them again, let them think they have the upper hand. We are going to build an impenetrable wall. I spent the entire weekend scanning every single piece of paper, organizing the digital files by year, labeling every contractor invoice, and backing everything up to 3 different cloud servers. I built a master spreadsheet detailing every penny spent, every hour of labor logged, and every email Dad had ever sent me acknowledging that I was the one paying for the cabin's upkeep. By Monday, Mr. Vance called me back. Your case is incredibly strong. Under the laws of equitable interest and unjust enrichment, they cannot simply liquidate an asset you have heavily capitalized without compensating you or clearing the title. Keep gathering records. And Lucas? Be careful. Families like yours tend to escalate violently when they realize they are losing their grip on you. His warning was terrifyingly prophetic. A week later, my new company published a glowing press release on LinkedIn announcing my hiring as the lead regional developer. Hundreds of colleagues, former clients, and friends flooded the comments with congratulations. Buried at the very bottom was a single, venomous comment from Marcus. Enjoy the stolen glory while it lasts, you backstabbing snake. Instead of engaging, I calmly took a screenshot, emailed it to Mr. Vance's paralegal for the harassment file, and permanently blocked Marcus's account. That Saturday, I decided the kids and I needed a break from the screen time. We drove to a large, beautiful park on the north side of the city. We spent 3 glorious hours climbing the jungle gym, feeding the ducks by the pond, and eating warm pretzels from a vendor. It was perfect. Watching Chloe and Noah laugh under the autumn sun solidified my resolve. I would never let the toxicity of my father and brother infect their lives. As we walked back to the parking lot, my kids holding my hands, Chloe suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. Daddy, what happened to your car? I looked up. The driver's side window of my SUV was completely shattered. Millions of glittering shards of safety glass blanketed the driver's seat and the pavement. My heart slammed against my ribs. Before I could even process the vandalism, a sickeningly familiar voice echoed from across the parking aisle. That's exactly what you deserve. I whipped around. Dad was standing 20 feet away, leaning against the hood of his truck, his hands casually stuffed in his pockets. He was looking at me with a twisted expression of triumph and malice, completely devoid of any regret. Noah screamed and buried his face in my leg, his tiny hands gripping my jeans so tightly it hurt. Chloe started sobbing instantly, terrified by the shattered glass and her grandfather's cruel face. Adrenaline flooded my veins. Every instinct screamed at me to charge at him, to physically tear him apart for terrorizing my children. But Mr. Vance's voice echoed in my head, document everything. I took a deep breath, pulled my phone out of my pocket, hit record on the camera, and held it up openly. I stepped in front of my crying children, shielding them with my body. Did you just say I deserve this? I asked, my voice projecting clearly over the wind. Dad didn't even flinch. He sneered right into the camera lens. Yes, you've been acting like an arrogant prick ever since you stole your brother's job. You needed to be brought down a peg. Did you shatter my car window, Dad? I asked, keeping the camera steady on his face. He smirked, a nasty, ugly curl of his lip. Maybe next time you'll learn your place and stop embarrassing your family, Lucas. That was the nail in his coffin. We're done here, I said coldly. Without breaking eye contact, I dialed 911 on my smartwatch, putting the dispatcher on speakerphone. Yes, I need police at Centennial Park immediately. A man just vandalized my vehicle and is verbally threatening me in front of my young children. I have it all on video. Dad's smug expression instantly evaporated, replaced by genuine, wide-eyed panic. He had fully expected me to yell, cry, or beg for his love like I had when I was a teenager. He never, in a million years, expected me to immediately invoke the law. He stood frozen for 3 seconds before scrambling into his truck and speeding out of the parking lot. I kept the camera rolling, capturing his license plate perfectly as he fled. I knelt down, pulling Chloe and Noah into a tight embrace, kissing the tops of their heads while we waited for the sirens. It's okay, guys, Daddy's got you. Nobody is ever going to hurt us. When the police arrived, I calmly handed my phone to the lead officer. He watched the video, grimaced at Dad's words, and inspected the shattered window. He practically confessed on tape, the officer muttered. Do you want to press charges? Absolutely, I said without a microsecond of hesitation. I want a full report, I want to press charges for destruction of property, and I need documentation for a restraining order. I gave the police Mr. Vance's contact information, filled out every form, and arranged for a tow truck. Instead of letting the trauma ruin the day, I called an Uber, took the kids to their favorite artisanal ice cream parlor, and bought them the biggest sundaes on the menu. While they ate, Chloe looked up, her eyes still a little red. Daddy? Why is Grandpa so mad at us? Did we do something bad? My heart shattered, but I looked her directly in the eyes. No, baby, you did absolutely nothing wrong. Grandpa has a sickness in his heart. He makes very bad choices. But my only job in this entire world is to keep you and your brother safe, and that is exactly what I am going to do. He will never yell at you again. That night, after the kids were asleep, I emailed the police report number, the video file, and the repair estimates to Mr. Vance. His reply came back 3 minutes later. Brilliant composure, Lucas. Do not contact him. Let them hang themselves. I blocked Dad's number, but my carrier allowed voicemails to pass through to an archived folder. Over the next 48 hours, he left 14 voicemails. They ranged from furious screaming about how I was tearing the family apart, to pathetic, tearful manipulation claiming I was brainwashing his grandchildren. I didn't listen to them twice, I just forwarded the audio files directly to the law firm. Marcus texted from a burner phone. You called the cops on your own father over a window? You are dead to us. Drop the charges, or else. Screenshot, forward to lawyer, block, update 2. 2 weeks later, the hammer dropped. A certified courier arrived at my front door holding a thick manila envelope. Inside was a formal civil lawsuit filed by Marcus and Dad. Marcus had hastily tried to push the sale of the cabin through a sketchy real estate broker to secure a $250,000 loan for his new logistics company. However, during the title search, the title company flagged massive unresolved ownership issues connected to Mom's estate. Because she died without a fully updated will, and because I had established a massive, documented financial footprint on the property, the title was clouded. They couldn't legally sell it without my signature releasing my interest. Instead of acting like rational human beings and negotiating, Marcus's cut-rate lawyer filed a lawsuit demanding the court strip me of any claim to the property, accusing me of malicious interference with the lawful transfer of family assets. I didn't panic. I didn't feel a drop of fear. I loaded my massive plastic bins of records into the trunk of my rental car and drove straight to Mr. Vance's office. I dropped the lawsuit on his mahogany desk. He read the complaint, his eyes scanning the aggressive legal jargon. When he finished, he didn't look worried. He looked absolutely elated. Lucas, Mr. Vance laughed softly, this is a gift. This is better than I could have ever orchestrated. They have forced the issue into a court of law without doing a single ounce of discovery to see what evidence you actually possess. They have walked blindfolded into a minefield. I opened the first storage box. I brought everything. For the next month, Mr. Vance and I built a legal fortress. We didn't rely on emotional pleas or family history. We relied on cold, hard, indisputable mathematics. We built chronological binders containing every single receipt for the $18,500 plumbing and foundation work, the $6,000 roof replacement, the hundreds of landscaping invoices, and the property tax checks I had written. We included the time-stamped photographs of me physically hammering nails into the deck while Marcus was off in Europe blowing Dad's money. We even found old emails from Mom, written a year before she died, explicitly stating her dream that the cabin would be a shared sanctuary for both her sons' families. They are operating under the delusion that this is just a family squabble, Mr. Vance said, tapping the massive stack of binders. Once a judge sees this paper trail, combined with the police report of your father violently attacking your property, they are going to be slaughtered. We filed our blistering counter-response. We formally challenged the transfer of the deed, placed a legal lien on the property for the exact amount of my financial contributions plus interest, and requested a full forensic accounting of Dad's financial transfers to Marcus over the last decade to prove Marcus was already heavily compensated from the family estate. 3 days after we served them, Marcus showed up at my house again. This time, I didn't even open the door. I spoke to him through the Ring doorbell camera, hitting the record button. What do you want, Marcus? I asked through the speaker. He looked exhausted, his eyes sporting dark, heavy bags. He stared into the camera lens, trying to look intimidating but failing miserably. Can we stop this legal bullshit, Lucas? You filed all these crazy motions just because you're throwing a tantrum. Dad is stressing out. His blood pressure is through the roof. Just sign the quitclaim deed so I can get my business funded. I actually laughed out loud in my living room. No, Marcus. You sued me because you were too stupid to check the title before trying to sell property you didn't own. You forced my hand. He rubbed his temples aggressively. You're really willing to destroy this family over a stupid wooden shack in Wisconsin? I didn't destroy this family, I replied, my voice echoing through the porch speaker. Dad destroyed this family 20 years ago when he decided you were a god and I was garbage. You destroyed it when you decided you were entitled to everything I bled to maintain. I'm just enforcing the consequences. He stared at the camera for a long time before spitting on my welcome mat and storming off. Another video saved, another piece of evidence logged. The preliminary hearing took place a month later. Marcus arrived at the courthouse wearing a flashy, clearly expensive suit that looked completely out of place. Dad walked in beside him, glaring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. I sat calmly next to Mr. Vance, wearing a modest navy suit, feeling completely at peace. When Marcus's lawyer stood up and pompously argued that I was a disgruntled sibling trying to hijack a simple family transfer, Mr. Vance didn't argue. He simply stood up and requested permission to approach the bench. He slid the first two massive, 500-page binders of evidence onto the judge's desk. Your Honor, Mr. Vance said smoothly, this is not speculation. This is over a decade of documented, obsessive financial stewardship by my client. He has invested over $45,000 in capital and labor into this property to prevent it from falling into ruin while the plaintiffs contributed nothing. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, opened the binder. The courtroom was dead silent as she spent 10 agonizing minutes flipping through the pristine records, the invoices, the canceled checks, and the photographs of me repairing the roof. She paused on a photo of Chloe, as a toddler, sitting on the newly rebuilt porch. Finally, the judge looked up, her expression hardening as she locked eyes with Marcus. Mr. Brother's last name, can you provide the court with any comparable documentation showing your financial contributions to the maintenance of this estate over the last 10 years? Marcus swallowed hard. He looked at his lawyer, then at Dad, and finally mumbled into the microphone, No, Your Honor. But it's family property. This court deals in facts and equity, not family entitlement, the judge snapped, cutting him off instantly. She looked at Dad. And I see here in the counter filing a police report detailing an incident where you shattered the defendant's car window in the presence of minors. Is this accurate? Dad's face drained of all color. That was a misunderstanding, Your Honor. I highly doubt the police report and the video evidence are a misunderstanding, the judge replied coldly. She refused to issue a summary judgment in their favor and ordered us into mandatory mediation, warning Marcus's lawyer that if they proceeded to a full trial, they were looking at potentially massive financial penalties and a forced partition sale where my liens would be paid out first, leaving them with pennies. The momentum had completely shifted. The predators suddenly realized they were trapped in a cage with the prey they had underestimated their entire lives. The mediation took place 2 weeks later in a neutral conference room. The mediator, a retired judge, sat at the head of the table. Marcus looked desperate. Dad looked like he had aged 10 years. Their lawyer looked incredibly frustrated with his own clients. Lucas, this has gotten entirely out of hand. Marcus pleaded, dropping the tough guy act completely. My investors are pulling out. If I don't get this capital this week, I'm ruined. Name your price. What do you want? Dad chimed in, his voice shaking. Just sign the paper, Lucas. You don't even use the cabin that much. You can buy your own vacation home with your fancy new tech salary. I looked at both of them, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a clinical detachment. It's not about buying another house, Dad. It's about protecting the one thing Mom wanted us to have, and it is not for sale. The mediator leaned forward. Mr. My last name, what are your conditions for settlement? Mr. Vance slid a single, crisp folder across the table. I looked directly into Marcus's eyes and dictated the terms that would end the war. Here is my final, non-negotiable offer. I said, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. 1. You dismiss this frivolous lawsuit with prejudice immediately. 2. Dad signs the deed of the cabin over to me, entirely, today. 3. Both of you sign legally binding affidavits permanently waiving any future claims to the property or Mom's estate. 4. You sign a permanent no-contact order regarding me, Chloe, and Noah. If you agree to all of this right now, I will drop the civil damages for the car window, I will drop the request for a forensic audit of Dad's finances, and I will walk away and never speak to either of you again. Marcus slammed his fists on the table, his face turning purple. You're stealing the cabin, you're blackmailing us. No, Marcus, I replied evenly, not blinking. I am offering you a way out of a legal slaughter. If we go to trial, I will win. The judge has already seen the evidence. If we go to trial, my liens will eat up the entire value of the property, you will get nothing, and Dad will likely face criminal charges for the vandalism if I push the district attorney. Sign the papers, or we go to court and I take everything. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Marcus looked at his lawyer, desperate for a loophole. His lawyer simply shook his head, a silent confirmation that they were utterly defeated. Dad stared at me, his eyes wide, finally realizing that the quiet, obedient punching bag he had abused for 35 years was completely gone. In his place was a father who would burn the world down to protect his peace. You're really going to cut your own flesh and blood off over this? Dad whispered, his voice cracking. You cut me off the day Mom died, I answered coldly. I'm just making it official on paper. It took them 45 minutes of agonizing whispering in the hallway, but they broke. They had no money to fight a protracted legal battle, and Marcus's desperate need for cash meant he couldn't afford to have the property tied up in litigation for years. They came back in, defeated, and signed every single document Mr. Vance put in front of them. When the final signature was inked, Mr. Vance collected the papers, shook the mediator's hand, and we walked out. I didn't say goodbye, I didn't look back. As I stepped out of the courthouse and into the bright Chicago sunlight, I didn't feel victorious or triumphant. I just took a massive, deep breath, and for the first time in my life, my lungs felt completely clear. The aftermath unfolded exactly as Mr. Vance predicted. Without the cabin to sell, Marcus's logistics startup imploded before it ever launched. He burned through the absolute last of Dad's dwindling retirement savings trying to keep it afloat, and eventually had to file for bankruptcy. Dad tried to call a few extended family members to smear my name, claiming I had manipulated the courts to steal his property, but court records are public. A few aunts and uncles read the actual filings, saw the sheer volume of my financial contributions, and saw the police report about the shattered window. Dad was quietly ostracized from the family text threads. They are now stuck in a tiny apartment together, drowning in debt, with absolutely no one to blame but themselves. My life, on the other hand, blossomed. My new boss, Sarah, was incredibly supportive. I thrived in the new role, receiving a massive bonus at the end of my first year, because my AI project launched ahead of schedule. The money was great, but the respect I received in that office being judged solely on my merits and hard work repaired something deep inside my soul. When summer arrived, I packed my SUV to the brim with paint, tools, fishing rods, and groceries. Chloe, Noah, and I drove up to the Wisconsin cabin. It was officially, legally ours. We spent the first 3 days working side by side. Chloe meticulously painted the flower boxes a bright, cheerful yellow, while Noah helped me sand down Mom's old wooden porch swing, his little face covered in sawdust and a massive grin. One evening, as the sun was setting over the glass-like surface of the lake, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, we sat on the newly stained deck. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of the water against the dock and the distant call of a loon. Chloe leaned her head against my shoulder, holding a mug of hot cocoa. "Daddy?" she asked softly, "do you think Grandma is happy we're here?" I looked around the property. I looked at the solid roof I had built, the cleared paths, and the safe, peaceful sanctuary I had fought tooth and nail to secure. I kissed the top of my daughter's head. "Yeah, sweetie," I whispered, tears finally pricking the corners of my eyes not out of grief, but out of profound gratitude. "I think she's incredibly happy. I didn't just win a lawsuit or a piece of real estate. I broke a generational curse. I proved to myself that I was worthy of respect, and I showed my children that they never have to tolerate abuse to earn love." Dad lost his son and his grandchildren. Marcus lost the golden ticket he tried to steal, but I gained the whole world, and I didn't have to shatter a single window to do it. The CEO's son laughed as he ground his heel into my silver name card, kicking it aside so his girlfriend could steal my VIP seat at the gala. He had no idea I was the lead underwriter for his mother's $1.5 billion financial lifeline, so instead of making a scene, I quietly restructured their entire corporate covenant, stripped him of his title, froze his mother's salary, and let the board of directors do the rest. At a crowded, suffocatingly opulent Manhattan gala, the CEO's son humiliated me in front of hundreds of people. He threw my silver name card to the floor, stepped on it with his polished dress shoe, and kicked it away so his girlfriend could take my assigned VIP seat. I stayed silent for one incredibly painful moment. The music seemed to stop. The clinking of champagne flutes faded into a ringing in my ears. I looked him dead in the eye, then turned to his mother and told him his little mistake had just cost her $1.5 billion. Catherine Vance's heels hit the imported marble floor like gunshots. She didn't look at her son first. She didn't look at the girlfriend, who was suddenly looking very unsure of her stolen chair. Catherine looked at me. Then she looked at the crushed silver card still in my hand, the heel print pressed violently into the embossed letters of my own name, Victoria Sterling. 20 years of building a career in high-stakes corporate finance teaches you to read a room in half a second, and I watched her do exactly that. I watched her number the security cameras in the corners of the ceiling. I watched her count the smartphones that were still raised in the crowd. I watched her calculate exactly how much of this catastrophic failure of judgment had already left the building through someone's 5G data plan. "Victoria." Her voice came out remarkably steady, but her hand found her son Julian's arm and gripped it hard enough that the 28-year-old man actually flinched. "Victoria, I am so incredibly sorry. Whatever this is, we will fix it right now. You can't unring a bell, Catherine." I set the ruined card down on the white linen table, corner up, like a piece of forensic evidence I didn't want smudged. "You especially can't unring a bell that 40 people just filmed in high definition." A young woman to my left, whose name I didn't know, still had her phone raised. The time 11:52 p.m. glowed faintly on her lock screen when she finally lowered the device, and I remember thinking, with a strange, icy clarity, that the timestamp on that recording was going to matter more than anything I actually said that night. Julian opened his mouth, likely to offer some arrogant, half-baked defense. Catherine's grip on his arm tightened again, her nails digging into his expensive tuxedo jacket, and this time, he actually shut his mouth. That single interaction told me more about their family dynamic than 6 months of grueling corporate due diligence had. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't demand an apology. I simply picked up my evening purse, thanked the stunned board member standing 3 feet away, a man named Richard Gable, who had been on Vance Dynamics board for 12 years and was the only person in that elite circle who looked more terrified than embarrassed, and I walked out through the catering kitchen because the front entrance already had a line of phones waiting for me. I did not sleep that night. I desperately want to say I did, that I'm the kind of seasoned professional who effortlessly compartmentalizes trauma and rests peacefully, but the truth is, I sat on my living room couch in yesterday's expensive gala dress until 3 a.m. I just kept replaying the sickening sound of his leather shoe grinding into that metal card. Somewhere around 2:40 a.m., the burning humiliation faded. I stopped being angry, and I started being useful. I stood up, walked to my home office, and opened my laptop. I started writing a memo. By the time the sun came up over the city skyline, that memo had a formal name. The Vance File. It would grow to 14 pages by the following Sunday. It started with one single, devastating line: "This is no longer a reputational question. This is a catastrophic diligence failure." I should back up, because absolutely none of what happened after that night makes any sense without understanding what I actually did for a living, and why a small silver card with my name on it was worth more than every floral centerpiece and chandelier in that massive ballroom combined. I had spent 15 years at Orion Capital, the last 7 as the managing director of investments. That is a very fancy, corporate way of saying that I am the person who decides who gets the money and who starves. I don't deal in small money, I deal in the kind of money that turns a struggling clean energy startup into a global market leader, or the kind of money that turns a legacy company's over-leveraged balance sheet into a front-page headline about bankruptcy. Vance Dynamics' proposed tranche was $1.5 billion, meticulously structured across 3 complex closings, with the first massive payment due in exactly 14 days. It was the single largest financial deal I had ever personally underwritten in my entire career. I had sat across from Catherine Vance a dozen times in the last 6 months. She was sharp, ruthlessly disciplined, and the kind of CEO who memorized her own capitalization table down to the 4th decimal point. She had built Vance Dynamics' new solar battery division from a sheer rounding error into a powerhouse that accounted for 45% of the company's total revenue. And she had done it while painstakingly cleaning up after 2 prior corporate scandals that had nearly sunk the legacy company entirely. There was a massive supplier bribery case in 2018, and a horrific hostile workplace lawsuit in 2022 that had cost them $7.5 million to settle quietly out of court. Catherine swore to me, every single time we met, that the old Vance Dynamics, the entitled, reckless, the toxic boys club where her father's legendary last name opened every door and closed every consequence, was completely dead and buried. The family doesn't run this company anymore, Victoria, she had told me back in April, sitting in a glass conference room on the 45th floor of her own headquarters. I run this company. My son Julian works in mergers advisory in Geneva. He is completely uninvolved in our operations. I believed her. That is the part that still burns me with deep, fiery embarrassment. I had entire teams of Ivy League analysts, forensic accountants, and an elite outside law firm on a massive retainer specifically to stress test claims exactly like hers. And yet, I believed a woman sitting across the table simply because she said the right words with the exact right amount of direct eye contact. Julian Vance was not working in mergers advisory in Geneva. Julian Vance held a completely fabricated title, Head of Strategic Partnerships, Vance Ventures. It was a role that, as far as my investigative team could later determine, required absolutely no actual partnerships and produced zero actual strategy. He drew a base salary of $400,000 a year. He had a dedicated executive assistant. He had, as I was about to discover, 3 prior internal HR complaints filed against him by name, all settled quietly, and all wrapped up in non-disclosure agreements thick enough to choke a federal courtroom. I didn't know any of those dark secrets on the night of the gala. I would know all of it 4 days later, and by then, it would be far too late for anyone to pretend I hadn't seen it. What I did know that first night was the sheer, terrifying scale of the number I was protecting. $1.5 billion isn't an abstraction when you have spent 6 grueling months building the financial models underneath it. I knew the supplier contracts intimately. I knew the payroll schedule for their new clean energy division down to the exact pay period. I knew that if this massive deal collapsed over a matter of pride, mine or anyone else's, it wouldn't be Catherine Vance who paid for it first. It would be a blue-collar line technician at a solar plant in Texas who had been promised a crucial raise contingent on our second tranche closing. It would be 2,500 everyday workers whose livelihoods were tied to my signature. That was the heavy, suffocating math sitting underneath every single decision I made for the next 14 days. It is the only reason I didn't just walk away the very next morning, pull the funding instantly, and let the vicious internet finish what I had started in that ballroom. The first real crack in the dam came at 6:14 a.m. The morning after the gala, when my phone simply would not stop vibrating on my nightstand, the video was everywhere. It wasn't just the physical stepping on the card, it was the entire humiliating exchange, uploaded from 3 different angles, because apparently, half the ballroom had decided to film a juicy Vance family scandal instead of eating their expensive seared scallops. Someone on social media had captioned it, "Titan Energy meets consequences," and it had racked up 500,000 views before my morning coffee had even finished brewing. I desperately told myself it was just internet noise. Internet noise usually dies a quiet death in 72 hours. I had watched it happen a dozen times with other volatile companies. I drank my coffee. I obsessively reread my own memo. I told myself the billion-dollar deal could survive a viral clip if Vance Dynamics handled the PR correctly. Cold, hard evidence proved me completely wrong by 9 a.m. when Marcus Lynn called. Marcus had been my direct boss for 12 years, a senior managing partner at Orion Capital with the kind of smooth, perpetually calm voice that made absolute disasters sound like a mild weather report. "Victoria, I need you to walk me through exactly what happened last night," Marcus said. I did. I walked him through it twice, because he asked me to repeat the exact, verbatim wording of what I had said to Julian, treating the phone call like a sworn legal deposition. "You told a room full of major political donors and 2 key board members that Vance Dynamics had just lost their flagship investment," Marcus said, his voice terrifyingly even. "Did you clear that statement with me first, Victoria?" I told him the absolute truth. He humiliated me at a public event where I was directly representing this fund, Marcus. My personal seat was silver-carded specifically so the room wouldn't know who was deciding their financial fate. He completely erased that anonymity in front of dozens of cameras. I am not disputing what he did, I am stating facts. Marcus's voice stayed level, but I could hear the immense, straining effort behind it. "I am telling you that Orion Capital has $45 million in advisory fees tied directly to this close. The other partners are going to ask me why our lead director on the biggest deal of the decade picked a petty public fight with the client's son at a charity gala." My hands weren't shaking yet, that came much later, but my stomach dropped in that sudden, nauseating way it does on an airplane losing altitude. It was that half second where your body intuitively knows something terrible that your brain hasn't fully caught up to yet. "Marcus, I didn't pick a fight," I said firmly. "I responded to one." "I know that," he sighed, a long, exhausted pause filling the line. "Just, handle it quietly, Victoria. Let Catherine do the damage control. Do not make this bigger than it has to be." I hung up the phone and sat with those words for a long time. Handle it quietly. As if the viral video hadn't already been quoted verbatim on 5 different major financial news blogs by breakfast. As if quiet was still a viable option that anyone on earth possessed. Update 1. Catherine called me an hour later. And to her absolute credit, she didn't try to spin me or lie her way out of it. "I want to meet. Just us. This morning," she said. Her voice had absolutely none of the polished composure she had displayed in the ballroom. "Please, Victoria." We met at a small, unassuming coffee shop 2 blocks away from Orion's main offices. We didn't meet at her massive headquarters, and we didn't meet at mine, which immediately told me she understood the public optics of this disaster far better than her arrogant son ever would. She looked like she hadn't slept a single minute either. She wore zero makeup, her hair was pulled back in a severe, messy clip, and she looked like a woman 20 years older than the vibrant CEO who had confidently walked me through her 10-year growth strategy back in April. "I am going to make him apologize publicly," Catherine said before I had even fully sat down in the booth. "We are drafting a statement today. He will say his behavior was completely inexcusable. That he deeply embarrassed the company, the family, and himself. That he—" "Catherine," I interrupted, letting her desperate words hang in the air for a second. "I don't need a PR apology. I need to know if what you told me to my face in April was actually true." Her jaw tightened visibly. It was the exact same arrogant, defensive gesture I had watched her son make the night before. And that micro-expression alone told me absolutely everything I needed to know. "He is not involved in the actual business," she insisted, her eyes darting away for a fraction of a second. "He has a purely ceremonial role. It's just optics, Victoria. It's to appease the legacy family shareholders. It doesn't mean anything." "A $400,000 annual salary for a role that doesn't mean anything?" I asked softly. I hadn't actually meant to say the exact dollar figure out loud yet. I had painstakingly pulled it from a deeply buried public filing at 4A, and without fully deciding if I was going to use it as a weapon. But the stricken, horrified look on her face told me it had landed like a nuclear bomb anyway. "How do you?" she stammered, trailing off. "It is literally in your own proxy statement, Catherine." "Item 402," I said, leaning forward across the small table, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I read financial filings for a living. You sat in my office and told my committee under oath in spirit, if not in actual law, that the reckless, toxic culture behind your company's past scandals was entirely gone. Last night, I watched your son completely ruin a stranger's evening because he wanted to impress a girlfriend with a stolen chair. That is not an isolated incident to me, Catherine. That is a massive diligence flag. And I have a strict legal and moral obligation to find out exactly how big that red flag is before Orion Capital wires you $1. She didn't argue. She didn't yell. She just looked at me, for one unguarded, devastating second, like a tired mother who already knew the horrible answer and had been desperately hoping nobody would ever ask the question out loud. I pulled my internal team together that very afternoon. It consisted of 2 senior analysts, a brilliant associate who had been with me for 5 years, and an outside legal counsel I trusted more than almost anyone else in this ruthless industry. Her name was Sylvia Thorne, a senior partner at Thorne & Vance Law who had spent 25 years doing absolutely nothing but complex securities and reputational risk work. Sylvia had a unique way of making a panicked room feel instantly calm just by opening her laptop and adjusting her glasses. I need absolutely everything you can legally find on Julian Vance, I told her, pacing my office. Internal complaints, HR settlements, padded expense reports, anything internal that has ever officially mentioned his name. You know perfectly well that most of that will be buried behind ironclad NDAs, Victoria, Sylvia warned, tapping her pen. We cannot force legal disclosure unless there is a material adverse change clause we can aggressively invoke, and even then, it's a massive, bloody fight. Then let's start with what isn't behind an NDA, I replied. It took us less than a single day to find the first major crack in the fortress wall, and it came from someone I had never expected to speak up. His name was David Sterling, Vance Dynamics' new head of compliance. He was barely 9 months into the high-stress job, and he was clearly still young and idealistic enough to believe that corporate compliance actually meant something more than just covering the boss's tracks. He reached out through Sylvia, not me. It was a highly intelligent move, since it kept his name at least 1 degree removed from a direct call log that Orion Capital could subpoena later. I am not a whistleblower. David told us on a secure conference call that I still have the exact, word-for-word transcripts of. I am simply telling you what is already fully documented in our own internal HR case management system. Because I think somebody desperately needs to know before this becomes a massive federal securities problem instead of just a bad PR day. He laid it all out. 3 formal complaints. 1 in 2022, 1 in 2023, and 1 in early 2024. All filed directly against Julian Vance. All alleging the exact same terrifying pattern of behavior. A junior employee would be publicly humiliated in front of colleagues, a vicious demand would be escalated until senior HR had to intervene, and a massive financial settlement would be signed fast enough that nobody had time to think twice or call a lawyer. The total payouts? $850,000. It had been quietly buried across 2 different fiscal years under a completely vague line item categorized as an employee relations reserve. None of it had ever reached the board of directors audit committee because none of it had ever been officially categorized as a BASA. Related party risk. I read the 3rd complaint file twice, my blood running completely cold. It was about a 27-year-old female associate who had been aggressively forced to give up her reserved hotel suite during a major company retreat in Aspen simply because Julian Vance had decided he wanted it for himself in his process. Friends. It wasn't the same night, and it wasn't the same suite, but it was the exact same metaphorical shoe. He was grinding the exact same kind of person into the dirt simply because nobody in his entire spoiled life had ever told him he couldn't. My hands finally started shaking as I read that last file. It wasn't from fear. It was from the very specific, white-hot kind of fury that comes from realizing you nearly signed off on a $1.5 billion check for a company that had been quietly paying nearly $1 million to keep a serial abuser's pattern invisible. I called David Sterling directly that evening, going explicitly against Sylvia's strict legal advice, because I needed to hear the man's actual voice instead of just reading his sterile words on a page. Why now, David? I asked him, staring out at the city lights. You could have easily sat on this, nobody would have ever known you talked to us. He was quiet for so long that I genuinely thought the cellular line had dropped. I took this job 9 months ago because the last compliance officer quit over exactly this pattern, and nobody replaced her for an entire year. David finally said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. I've read those 3 HR files more times than I can count. I kept thinking that eventually, somebody with actual leverage would ask the right question. A pause. You asked it at a public gala in front of 300 people. Which is certainly not how I would have chosen to do it, but you asked it. That's not very comforting, David, I whispered. It's not supposed to be comforting, Victoria, it's supposed to be honest. Another long pause. Quieter this time. The associate in the 3rd file. She's 28 now. She left the energy industry entirely after her settlement. She was brilliant. I have her exit interview memo if your legal counsel ever needs it, though God knows I'd rather it never come to that for her sake. She's been through enough. I didn't sleep well after that call either. Some evidence doesn't just help you build a corporate case, It brutally reminds you what the case is actually about in the first place. By Thursday, 4 agonizing days after the gala, Vance Dynamics stock, ticker VANC, dropped a staggering 16% in a single trading session. And it wasn't just because of the viral video alone. It was because Elena Rostova, a notoriously ruthless reporter at the Times Financial Chronicle Times who had covered activist investing for a decade and had a stellar reputation for never printing anything she couldn't back with 2 solid sources, ran a devastating story titled, "The VIP Seat Julian Vance Couldn't Buy." Elena had the original video, but more importantly, she somehow had a partial copy of the 2023 financial settlement. It didn't come from me, and it didn't come from David Sterling. It came from an anonymous source she absolutely refused to name, which in this cutthroat business usually means someone deep inside the company itself had finally decided the silence had gone on long enough. Catherine Vance called me 14 times that day. I only answered twice. "You are the one feeding her this garbage," Catherine screamed the second time I picked up, and for the very first time in 6 months, I heard genuine, unfiltered rage in her voice instead of practiced CEO composure. I have spoken to Elena Rostova exactly one time in my entire life, at a dull conference in 2021 about federal interest rate policy. I replied coldly. "If you want to know who is talking to the press, Catherine, I would highly suggest you start by asking yourself why 3 different employees over 3 years all decided that their silence wasn't worth whatever hush money you paid to keep it." She slammed the phone down on me. It was the only time in our entire professional relationship she ever hung up first. Elena Rostova called me 20 minutes later, and I almost didn't pick up. Reporters had been blowing up my direct office line since Tuesday morning, and I had let every single one of them go straight to voicemail on Sylvia's strict orders. I only picked up this specific call because the caller ID matched the terrifying byline I had been reading all morning. "I am not asking you to confirm anything," Elena said rapidly before I had even said hello properly. "I already have the signed settlement documents and 2 former Vance employees willing to talk on background. I am calling you because I think you should know exactly what is going to print tomorrow morning, since Orion Capital's name is heavily attached to the upcoming closing." "Why tell me that?" I asked, my grip tightening on the receiver. "You don't owe me anything, Elena. Because in my 10 years of covering this rotten industry, I have watched exactly 2 managing directors actually walk away from a billion-dollar deal over a moral failure, instead of quietly waiting for the 24-hour news cycle to move on. I don't know yet which kind of director you are. I'd rather ask than assume." I heard papers shuffling on her end. "Off the record, Victoria, what does Orion actually do with this mess?" "On the record," I said, my voice steadying. "Whenever you are ready to print it, Orion Capital takes corporate governance failures incredibly seriously, and we will absolutely not finalize any financial transaction until we are 100% satisfied that the underlying cultural issues have been thoroughly addressed." It was the absolute truth, and it was also the exact first sentence in what would eventually become the official public statement Sylvia and I drafted together 2 nights later. Elena didn't print my quote that week. She held onto it and printed it the week the deal actually closed, word for word. She told me months afterward that it was the only quote in the entire sordid saga that hadn't needed a single editorial adjustment. That exact same night, Chloe, Julian's now infamous girlfriend from the gala, posted something that completely changed the entire trajectory of the story. She didn't post it on her main social media account, where the original video had already racked up 3.5 million views. She posted it on a smaller, private burner account. It was the kind of account people use when they want something highly damaging seen by exactly the right people and absolutely nobody else. It was a screenshot of an iMessage thread. It was from Julian, sent at 1:14 a.m. The night of the gala, clearly 3 expensive drinks past whatever tiny shred of judgment he had left. The text read, "Delete the video right now or I'm done paying your rent." Chloe hadn't deleted the video. Instead, she had taken a screenshot of his thread and immediately forwarded it to Elena Rostova. I don't know Chloe. I have never met her, I never spoke to her, and I don't know if her actions came from a sudden crisis of conscience or simply from the particular, burning fury of a 23-year-old woman finally realizing she was being treated like a purchased possession. But her single screenshot did more to permanently shatter Julian Vance's carefully curated public image than anything I could have ever said in that ballroom. Because it wasn't just a random corporate stranger accusing him of arrogance anymore. It was his own girlfriend, exposing his own toxic words, showing the entire world exactly what kind of pathetic man paid other people's rent specifically to use it as a leash. Update 2. By Friday morning, exactly 1 week after the disastrous gala, Vance Dynamics Board of Directors called an emergency, closed-door session. Richard Gable, the lead independent director who had been standing next to me when the card was crushed, phoned me personally right beforehand. It was the very first time in 6 months that anyone from that board had called me directly instead of carefully routing everything through Catherine. "I need to understand something right now, Victoria," Richard said. And I could hear, underneath the careful, measured diction of a man who had spent a decade learning to sound perfectly calm in volatile board meetings, that he was genuinely, deeply rattled. Did Orion Capital know about the prior HR complaints before the gala? No, I said flatly, and that is exactly the problem, Richard. Your own internal audit committee clearly didn't know about them either, or you wouldn't be calling to ask me. There was silence on the line for so long that I checked my screen to see if the call had dropped. We have a massive fiduciary duty question on our hands now, Richard finally whispered, sounding completely defeated. If the board knew about these payouts and actively buried them, that is a severe federal securities exposure. If we didn't know, that is a massive internal control failure serious enough to completely void the reps and warranties in your financial term sheet. Either way, I do not see how Monday's closing happens as originally structured. Monday. That was the single word that turned this from a tightly controlled corporate crisis into an absolute freefall. The first financial tranche, a staggering $1.5 billion, which was 14 days out when I had first written the timeline, was due to officially close on Monday morning at 9 a.m. sharp. Vance Dynamics' new clean energy division had a massive supplier payment of $200 million due the very following week that depended entirely on that Orion money landing in their accounts. 2,500 jobs, the exact blue-collar jobs I had stood in that ballroom and told Julian I represented, depended entirely on whether Orion Capital wired that money or walked away. I had until Monday morning to decide, and every single hour that passed narrowed what deciding even meant. Marcus Lynn completely stopped being calm on Saturday. The other partners want this deal closed, Victoria, he told me, pacing back and forth in my own office at 8 p.m. on a Saturday night. That alone told me exactly how much immense pressure had rolled downhill onto his shoulders. Two other aggressive hedge funds are already circling Vance's clean energy assets like vultures in case we walk away, if we pull out over a stupid gala incident. It is not a gala incident, Marcus, I snapped, finally raising my voice. It is a documented, multi-year pattern of concealed corporate misconduct with a related party compensation structure that the board of directors never legally disclosed to us. If we close on Monday as originally structured, and any of this becomes an SEC investigation later, Orion Capital officially signed off on a company we knew had massive, unresolved governance failures. That is not just reputational risk. That is a direct fiduciary problem for us. He stopped pacing and violently rubbed his face with both hands, something I had genuinely never seen Marcus Lynn do in 12 years of working together. Then what the hell do you want to do, Victoria? Walk away from $1.5 billion and eat the massive fee clawback? Because the senior partners will demand answers, and I need an answer much better than I was humiliated at a fancy party. I have until Monday morning to give you a better answer than that, I said quietly. I hadn't eaten a single thing since breakfast. My third cup of coffee had gone completely cold on the corner of my mahogany desk 2 hours earlier, and I hadn't even noticed until that exact moment when my stomach finally cramped, reminding me it existed. Two competing funds circling meant two other managing directors were making this exact same cold calculation right now, but with absolutely none of the rigorous diligence I had spent a week painstakingly building. If we walked away quietly, Vance Dynamics gets rescued by someone with far less information than we have. Julian Vance never faces a single real consequence. And that $850,000 reserve line item just gets buried one fiscal year deeper in the books. If we close as originally structured, we are complicit in the cover-up. There is a third option, I said, looking up at Marcus. I need 48 hours to build it properly instead of just reacting to a news headline. I never once said we walk away. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Somewhere between Thursday afternoon and Saturday night, all the fear and anxiety had completely burned off, leaving something much colder, sharper, and infinitely more useful behind. I say we restructure. I told him, pulling up a new document. A conditional close. We fund the exact tranche the company actually needs to save those 2,500 worker jobs, but Julian Vance is completely out. No fake title, no $400,000 salary, no shadow influence in the company, full stop, written directly into the binding covenant. The independent audit committee gets direct, unfiltered reporting authority over any future related party HR complaints. And Catherine Vance puts her own massive CEO compensation package on hold until an outside auditing firm confirms the culture problem is actually fixed, not just PR apologized for. Marcus looked at me for a long, heavy moment. You've had this drafted already, since Wednesday. I turned my laptop around and showed him the memo. It was 14 pages by then. Every single HR complaint was documented, every SEC filing was cross-referenced. And Sylvia Thorne's ironclad legal language was wrapped around the entire thing so it would survive a vicious partner meeting instead of just satisfying my own personal conscience. Marcus read it twice. The second time, he read it much slower. If the board rejects these draconian conditions, he finally said, looking over his glasses, we walk. All of it. I will personally back you on that with the senior partners. I felt something tight in my chest finally loosen for the first time in a week. Sunday night, exactly 20 hours before the Monday closing deadline, Catherine Vance came to my office. She came completely alone. No corporate lawyer, no executive assistant, no PR team with phones raised to catch the moment. "You could completely destroy this company," she said, sitting across from the exact same desk where I had once believed every single word she told me back in April. "You know that, Victoria." "I could," I agreed softly. "But I am not going to. Unless your board makes me." I slid the thick term sheet across the desk to her. The real one. The revised one. The one with Julian's name violently struck from every single line it had ever appeared on. "I built 2,500 jobs into every single version of this deal from day one, Catherine. I absolutely do not want to be the reason hardworking clean energy workers lose their livelihoods just because your arrogant son wanted a VIP chair. But I will not fund a toxic corporate culture that pays $850,000 to keep young female employees quiet just so a legacy family name stays clean. Those are not the same thing, and you do not get to hide behind the first one to protect the second." She read the covenant slowly, line by grueling line. I watched her eyes track across the page until she got to the specific clause about her own compensation freeze. I watched her jaw do that exact same tight, defensive thing her sons did. And for a terrifying second, I thought she was going to stand up and walk out the exact same way he had, all wounded, arrogant pride and absolutely no accountability. Instead, she picked up a pen and signed her initials next to it. Right there on my desk, before her own high-priced lawyers had even seen the final draft. "He is 28 years old," she said quietly, not looking up from the paper. I kept thinking there was still time to fix what I let him become. "There still is," I said gently. "Just not on the company's dime, and not on my 17 employees' backs." She left my office without saying another word. I don't know if that silence was born from bruised pride or deep shame. It was probably a messy combination of both. Over the years, I've come to believe those two specific feelings live much closer together than successful people like to admit. I didn't sleep that night either. I sat by my large office window with the revised term sheet still open on my brightly lit laptop, obsessively rereading the covenant language one more time. I read it the exact same way I had reread the crushed silver card a week earlier, desperately checking for anything I had missed, any tiny legal gap Julian's old title could somehow crawl back through in 18 months once the media stopped watching. Sylvia had aggressively built in a 5-year look back on all related party compensation, specifically so that couldn't happen quietly. I called her at 2 a.m. and made her add a 6th year. It was a small, petty thing, but it mattered deeply to me anyway. The official board vote happened on Monday at 7 a.m., exactly 2 hours ahead of the original closing deadline. It happened in a closed session that Richard Gable later told me lasted barely 11 minutes, because absolutely nobody on that board wanted to be the name on the official legal record defending Julian Vance once the full 14-page file was sitting in front of them. The vote was 9-1 in favor of the restructured terms. The one single dissenting vote, I was told later, came from an elderly board member who had known Julian since he was a child and simply couldn't bring himself to do it. Which is its own kind of sad, pathetic story that I don't have room for here. By Monday afternoon, Vance Dynamics issued a formal 8K disclosure. It is the specific kind of SEC filing companies only make when something material enough has happened that silence itself becomes a massive legal risk. The filing officially confirmed Julian Vance's immediate departure from all roles at the company. It cited a governance restructuring and noted an independent third-party review of workplace conduct policies. It didn't use the word times humiliation. It didn't need to. Every single financial reporter covering the story already had that exact word from Elena Rostova's devastating piece and from the viral video, which by then had cleared an astonishing 6 million views across platforms. Julian didn't fight the ousting publicly. I heard through various industry channels I won't name that Chloe officially left him within the week, taking her bags and moving out of the apartment he paid for. I heard that his father, who had been divorced from Catherine since Julian was 12 and was largely absent from any of this mess, didn't return a single one of his desperate phone calls. And I heard that the lavish strategic partnerships office he had occupied for 3 years was quietly reassigned to an actual, working partnerships team within the month. I won't pretend I felt sorry for him. I didn't. I felt something much closer to sheer relief. It was the specific kind of relief that comes after you have finally stopped bracing for a brutal physical blow you were absolutely sure was coming. The $1.5 billion deal officially closed on Wednesday. It was exactly 2 days late, and the company was $400,000 lighter in projected annual overhead. But it closed with ironclad covenants that finally gave David Sterling's compliance office direct, unfiltered reporting lines to the board of directors for the very first time in the company's long history. Sylvia Thorne told me months afterward that it was the absolute tightest related party clause she had drafted in a decade, mostly because I had made her rewrite it 4 different times until it completely closed every single gap Julian's old title had ever lived inside. 6 months later, I stood in a very different room. There was no imported marble floor. There were no embossed silver cards, and there were no champagne flutes. It was just a massive, converted industrial warehouse outside of Austin, Texas, where Vance Dynamics' Clean Energy Division was finally finishing the installation on a state-of-the-art battery storage facility. According to the financial numbers I had personally underwritten, this single facility would keep the power running for 15,000 homes during the brutal peak summer demand. Catherine Vance gave the ribbon-cutting speech herself. She didn't mention her son a single time. And I noticed, with a small pang of recognition, that she had completely stopped wearing the gold family crest pin she used to wear on her lapel to every single meeting we ever had. Afterward, she found me standing quietly by the folding coffee table, maintaining the exact same careful, professional distance she had kept since the night of the gala. David Sterling got promoted, she said smoothly, pouring a cup of black coffee. He is the chief compliance officer now. He reports straight to Richard's committee. No interference. I heard, I replied, taking a sip of my own coffee. I also heard you told Marcus Lynn you would resign your position before you signed off on the deal as originally structured. I hadn't confirmed that detail to anyone, but apparently, very little stays quiet in this incestuous industry for long. I told him I wasn't going to be the person who wired $1.5 billion into a massive corporate cover-up. Resignation was just what that meant if he disagreed. She almost smiled. Almost. You could have destroyed us for pure sport, you know, after what he did to you in front of all those people. Nobody in the industry would have blamed you for pulling the plug entirely. I didn't do this for sport, Catherine, I said softly. I looked past her shoulder at the dozens of workers in hard hats finishing the last solar panel installation. I looked at the 2,500 jobs that were still jobs simply because somebody had cared enough to fight for the right conditions instead of just walking away with a flashy news headline. I did it because you told me in April that the reckless, toxic part of this company was gone. It wasn't, but it could be. That is the only reason I stayed at the table instead of just taking the entire story to Elena Rostova myself and letting the whole thing burn to the ground. She nodded slowly, and for the very first time since that horrible night in Manhattan, I believe she actually understood the profound difference. I still have the silver card. It has a torn corner, a scuffed edge, and a deep, permanent heel print violently stamped into the metal. But, my name is still perfectly legible underneath the damage. It sits quietly in the top drawer of my desk in my office. It isn't framed, and it isn't proudly displayed for visitors to see. It is just kept there, the exact way you keep a deep scar you don't need to show anyone else to remember exactly what it cost you to survive. Julian Vance thought he just wanted a VIP chair for his girlfriend. What he actually did was teach an entire billion-dollar company, the man who used to be my boss, and a boardroom full of powerful people who had spent years looking the other way, exactly how much one single silver card had been worth all along. Turns out, it wasn't about the seat. It never was, it was about the name on it. My fiancée threw her ring at me and called me a loser because I inherited a worthless cabin. So I kept my $165 million discovery a secret, and bought my brother's bankrupt company. I am Marcus, and I am 34 years old. Just 3 days ago, the woman I had promised to spend the rest of my natural life with stood up in the middle of our cramped Logan Square apartment, ripped her diamond engagement ring off her finger, and threw it across the dining table so violently that it physically chipped my favorite ceramic coffee mug. She looked down at me and called me a pathetic, unambitious loser. She did this without a single ounce of hesitation or remorse, and she did it right in front of my older brother Tristan, his smug and incredibly wealthy wife Serena, and two of our closest mutual friends. While I sat there in absolute stunned silence, trying to process the humiliating reality of my life completely collapsing in real time, my brother Tristan leaned back in his creaky wooden chair. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his expensive vintage scotch, looked at me with total and utter disgust, and said, "She is right, Marcus, you have always been a zero. You are dead weight in this family." They laughed. They actually sat in the chairs I bought with my hard-earned salary, eating the roasted pork loin I spent 3 hours cooking, and laughed at me in my own home. This was fresh off the heels of the most brutal and insulting inheritance reading imaginable. But there is one massive, world-altering thing they did not know. They did not know about the rusted, heavy iron lockbox buried deep under the floorboards of a freezing, run-down, apparently worthless cabin in the absolute middle of nowhere in the Yukon Territory of Canada. And right now, as I speak to you today, my golden child brother is drowning in a massive commercial lawsuit, facing total and complete bankruptcy, and desperately begging a mysterious international mining conglomerate for a financial bailout to save his pathetic image and his precious Chicago real estate firm. He has absolutely no idea that the chairman of that conglomerate, the nameless, faceless billionaire holding his entire future, his legacy, and his livelihood in the palm of his hand is me. To truly understand the crushing weight of that moment in my apartment and the sheer magnitude of the betrayal I felt from Chloe and Tristan, you have to understand the massive, suffocating shadow I grew up in. My older brother Tristan was the golden child. It was never just a quiet, subtle preference hidden behind closed doors. It was a loud, undeniable, daily reality in our household. My father, Arthur, was a titan in the commercial real estate world. He built a massive empire in Chicago from the ground up, starting with nothing but a small loan and ruthless ambition. He was a man who deeply respected aggression, loud voices, sharp elbows, and unforgiving negotiation tactics. Tristan was his absolute mirror image. From the time we were little kids, the divide was painfully clear. I remember one specific Thanksgiving dinner when we were teenagers. The entire extended family was seated around our massive dining table in Lake Forest. My father stood up, raised his glass, and spent 10 solid minutes praising Tristan for negotiating a discount on a used car he bought with his allowance. He called him a shark. He called him a true conqueror. When it was my turn to be acknowledged, my father simply patted my shoulder and told the family that I had managed to keep my room clean all month. The entire table chuckled. I was the safe, boring, invisible child. When Tristan turned 16, my father bought him a brand new custom-ordered sports car. He handed him the keys in the driveway with a massive grin, telling him that winners drive fast. When I turned 16, exactly 2 years later, my father bought me a leather briefcase and gave me a firm handshake. He told me it was time to start thinking about a practical, reliable salary because the world didn't hand out free rides to quiet, cautious people. I wasn't naturally aggressive. I hated conflict. I liked structure, details, quiet focus, and the beauty of designing something that would last. I didn't want to fight contractors or evict tenants. I went to a state college, paid for mostly by my own student loans because my father refused to fully fund a degree he didn't deem lucrative, and I became an architectural drafter. I drew the intricate, flawless blueprints that other more charismatic men took credit for in high-rise boardrooms. I was genuinely good at it. I was incredibly precise. But precision doesn't get your name on a brass plaque. I will never ever forget the day I failed my architectural licensing exam for the second time. I was 27 years old, exhausted from working full-time and studying all night. I sat at the polished mahogany dining table in my parents' Lake Forest mansion, feeling like I was shrinking into the expensive leather chair. My father sat directly across from me. He didn't yell. He didn't slam his fists on the table. He just looked at me over his gold-rimmed reading glasses and let out a long, heavy, incredibly disappointed breath. "Marcus," he said, his voice entirely void of any anger, which somehow made the words cut 10 times deeper. "You need to face reality. You are not executive material. You just aren't wired for it. You don't have the killer instinct required to run anything of value. Every firm in the world needs someone to sit in the back room and do the quiet, careful work. Accept your limitations. Leave the leading, the building, and the legacy to Tristan." It broke me. It shattered my confidence into a million unrecoverable pieces, but I accepted it. I accepted my place in the background of my own life. My mother, Eleanor, was the only one who ever offered a different perspective, though she always made sure to do it when my father wasn't in the room. She was a quiet, unassuming woman, constantly fading into the expensive wallpaper of our home, seemingly completely content to let my father dictate the entire narrative of our family. She would slide a plate of warm chocolate chip cookies onto my drafting desk late at night while I was sketching and whisper, "You have the hands of a true builder, Marcus. Precision takes time. Do not let loud men convince you that quiet work has no value." I thought she was just a helpless, submissive wife trying to make her lesser son feel a tiny bit better. I couldn't have been more wrong about her. Then came Chloe. We met at a high-profile charity gala I was forced to attend to represent the family business because Tristan was out of town on a ski trip. She was sharp, incredibly beautiful, and ruthlessly ambitious. I fell for her hard and fast. Looking back now with clear, unclouded eyes, I should have seen the neon red flags waving directly in my face. Her love was fiercely, terrifyingly practical. She didn't ask about my dreams or the buildings I wanted to design. She asked about my 401k matching plan and my stock options. She didn't want to know about my hard day at work. She wanted to know exactly when my father was finally going to stop treating me like an intern and make me a full partner in the firm with a 6-figure salary bump. She constantly, relentlessly pushed me to confront Tristan, to demand a bigger piece of the family pie. She would casually drop calculated hints about the lavish European vacations her friends were taking, comparing my modest, hard-earned salary to their massive Wall Street bonuses. I completely blinded myself to it. I ignored every single warning sign because, for the first time in my entire invisible life, someone was demanding that I stand in the spotlight. I foolishly mistook her naked greed for a profound belief in my potential. Everything finally shattered the year I turned 34. My parents passed away within 12 agonizing weeks of each other. My father went first, suffering a sudden, massive heart attack right behind his heavy oak desk in his home office. My mother followed shortly after, a quiet, peaceful fading away in her sleep in a hospital bed, almost as if she had completed her lifelong duty and simply decided to clock out of this world. The grief was a heavy, suffocating blanket that I couldn't shake. I spent weeks organizing the funerals, handling the caterers, writing the obituaries. Tristan just showed up in a black designer suit and shook hands. But in my family, grief was an inconvenience that was quickly pushed aside for the real business. The money. The reading of the will took place in the sterile, heavily air-conditioned, glass-walled conference room of a downtown Chicago law firm. Mr. Harrison was a seasoned, silver-haired trust and estates lawyer, a man who had spent 4 decades watching greedy families tear each other to absolute shreds over summer homes and jewelry. He sat at the head of the long conference table, his face entirely unreadable. Tristan sat next to Serena, practically vibrating with greedy anticipation. Serena was actively looking at luxury real estate listings on her phone screen. Chloe had her hand resting tightly on my knee under the table, her manicured nails digging painfully into my leg in anticipation of our big payout. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and began reading the dense legal document. The entire commercial real estate business, the massive $15 million Lake Forest mansion with all its antique contents, the liquid assets totaling over $5 million, the high-yield investment portfolios, the brand-new Mercedes-Benz S-Class, and the vintage Aston Martin. All of it, every single valuable visible asset, went directly to Tristan. My brother didn't even try to hide his smirk. He puffed out his chest, looking around the room like a conquering emperor. Serena leaned back in her plush chair, a look of supreme, arrogant satisfaction washing over her heavily Botoxed face. She reached over and squeezed Tristan's arm tightly. Then came my portion. Mr. Harrison looked down at the thick paper, then briefly up at me, a flicker of something resembling genuine pity crossing his eyes. To my second son, Marcus, Mr. Harrison read aloud, his voice steady and formal. I leave the sum of $15,000 in cash to cover travel expenses, and the deed to the 250-acre property and the single-structure wooden cabin located in the Yukon Territory of Canada. Furthermore, the attached handwritten letter is to be opened by Marcus alone, and only upon his physical arrival at said cabin. The room went completely, uncomfortably, dead silent. It was the kind of quiet that sucks the oxygen right out of your lungs. Chloe's hand retracted from my knee instantly, as if she had just touched a burning hot stove. Wait, that's it? Chloe asked, her voice cracking the silence, shrill and panicked. A frozen swamp, a rotting shack, and $15,000? You have to be joking. This is a mistake. Mr. Harrison looked up, his expression hardening into professional stone. I assure you, miss, this is a legally binding document. Those were Arthur's explicit final wishes. There is also a specific addendum here stating Marcus inherits what he valued most. Do not interfere. Tristan let out a low, mocking whistle. What he values most, right? Well, Marcus, looks like Dad finally evaluated our respective contributions to the family legacy and put an exact price tag on it. But hey, if you ever need a weekend getaway to freeze to death in the wilderness, let me know. I'll pay for your economy coach ticket. Family takes care of family, right? I sat there completely and utterly numb. I felt like I had been violently erased from my own family tree. It wasn't about the money. I had never cared about the luxury cars, the mansions, or the country club memberships. It was about the final, undeniable, legally binding declaration from the grave that my own father viewed me as entirely worthless. It was a wound so incredibly deep, so profoundly invalidating, I couldn't even find the breath to speak. I just mechanically signed the required legal papers and walked out of the building into the cold Chicago air. Chloe trailed 10 feet behind me, furiously typing on her phone, her face pale with absolute rage and vicious calculation. The toxic, humiliating fallout from that while reading culminated in that horrific, unforgettable dinner party in my Logan Square apartment. Let me take you back there for a moment. Let me put you inside my head during that exact second. Because understanding the sheer depth of Chloe's betrayal is absolutely crucial to understanding the ruthless, calculating man I was forced to become. We had invited Tristan and Serena, along with Chloe's best friend Blair and Blair's husband Vance. It was supposed to be a healing family dinner, but it was a firing squad, and I was tied firmly to the post. Chloe had been acting cold, distant, and highly irritable for weeks. She poured herself a third heavy glass of red wine, her eyes darting around the cheap, peeling molding of our living room ceiling like she was trapped in a filthy, degrading cage. Tristan, sitting at the head of my small wobbly dining table like a visiting king slumming it with the local peasants, was busy complaining. He was loudly and obnoxiously lamenting the exorbitant maintenance costs of the vintage Aston Martin he had just inherited. Serena was checking her diamond-encrusted watch every 5 minutes. Blair, Chloe's absolute viper of a best friend, leaned forward across the table. She had this wicked, calculating little smile on her face. She asked the question that lit the match. So, Marcus, Blair purred, taking a delicate theatrical bite of her salad, when exactly are you going up to see your little wooden shack in the Yukon? Are you going to start chopping firewood for a living? Maybe grow out a massive beard and live off the grid since the corporate city life clearly didn't pan out for you? Vance chuckled loudly, cutting his meat with aggressive, dismissive force. I looked down at my plate. My stomach was in tight, painful knots. I gripped my fork so hard my knuckles turned completely white. I tried to keep my voice steady. I told them I was flying up that coming weekend to carefully inspect the property. I explained that it was the only thing my father had left me in this world. I had to at least see it to find some kind of closure. That was the exact moment Chloe snapped. The fragile facade she had been maintaining completely dropped. She slammed her wine glass down on the table so hard I thought the crystal stem would shatter into 100 pieces. The dark red liquid splashed over the rim onto the white tablecloth, spreading outward like a fresh, ugly wound. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. She told me she was done. She said she had wasted 3 of the best, most vibrant years of her life, waiting for me to finally step out of Tristan's massive shadow. She screamed that she had been waiting for me to get a real promotion, waiting for the massive real estate payout that would secure our future in a high-end local HOA. She looked me dead in the eyes, her face twisted with a level of pure, unadulterated contempt I had never seen before. "You are absolutely nothing," Chloe spat, her voice echoing violently off the thin walls of our apartment. "Your own father knew it, everyone sitting in this room knows it. That is exactly why he left Tristan the entire empire, the accounts, the properties, and left you a pile of rotting wood in the freezing snow. You are a pathetic loser, Marcus. You have no ambition. You have no spine. You let people walk all over you, and I refuse to sink to the bottom of the ocean with you." She aggressively slid the beautiful, expensive diamond ring I had worked overtime for 8 straight months to buy right off her finger. She threw it. It hit the table, bounced high, and struck my favorite ceramic mug. The sound was deafening in the sudden, heavy silence of the room. She marched to the door, grabbed her designer coat off the rack, and walked out without looking back once. Blair and Vance stood up awkwardly, offered a fake, whispered apology, and scurried out the door right after her. Tristan just sat there for a long moment. He didn't offer a single word of brotherly comfort. He just shook his head, reached into his tailored suit jacket, pulled out a crisp, brand new $100 bill, and tossed it onto my plate of mashed potatoes. "To cover the groceries, little brother," he said smoothly. He stood up, took his wife by the arm, and headed home to their newly inherited $15 million mansion, leaving me completely alone with the ruins of my life. I did not cry. I sat entirely alone in the suffocating silence of that apartment for 3 solid hours. I watched the grease congeal on the roasted pork. I stared at the $100 bill sitting in my potatoes, and then something deep inside me clicked into place. The next morning, before the sun even came up over the city skyline, I packed a heavy winter coat, drove my beat-up car to O'Hare, and boarded a plane to Canada. I was about to discover the one thing my father had spent his entire life protecting. Update 1. The journey to the Yukon was grueling. I took a commercial flight to Whitehorse, then a smaller, terrifying puddle jumper to Dawson City. From there, I rented a heavy-duty truck and drove deep into the absolute middle of nowhere near Tombstone Territorial Park. I rented a snowmobile from a rugged, weather-beaten local outfitter named Kalen. When I handed over my ID and told him I was Arthur's son, heading up to the old cabin on the ridge, his dark eyes widened slightly. "Your old man paid me very well to keep an eye on that place in the winters," Kalen said, his breath pluming in the freezing air as he handed me a heavy, rusted set of keys. "He came up here twice a year for 38 years. Never brought a hunting rifle, never brought fishing gear, just sat in that cabin for a few days and left. He always told me he was guarding a treasure, waiting for the right time to pass the torch. I guess you're the torch, kid. Ride safe. The ice doesn't care who your daddy was." The 25-mile ride was brutal. The wind howled like a wounded animal, whipping ice crystals into my face like shattered glass. By the time I finally saw the gray outline of the cabin against the endless, blinding white wilderness, my hands were entirely numb inside my heavy winter gloves. I stumbled inside the dark, freezing room, lit a fire in the old iron stove with trembling hands, and waited 40 agonizing minutes just for the air to warm enough so my fingers could physically move. I found the loose floorboard exactly where the lawyer's notes had indicated. I pulled out the heavy lockbox. I broke the wax seal on the thick manila envelope. Inside was a 45-page geological assay report from 2021. It detailed a massive, highly concentrated deposit of neodymium and dysprosium rare earth minerals that are absolutely essential for modern consumer technology, electric vehicles, and advanced military defense systems. And then I unfolded the handwritten letter from my father. "Marcus, if you are sitting in this cabin reading this letter, it means you actually made the trip. You didn't just cash the $15,000 check and ignore the land like Tristan would have. You did the careful work. I always knew you would. I know you spent your entire life thinking I favored Tristan. In the visible world, I did. I gave him the company, the cars, the house in Lake Forest. I gave him those things because he is aggressive, loud, and entirely predictable. Tristan is a consumer, he is an acquirer. If I had left him this land, he would have sold it to the highest bidding mining corporation within 6 months. He would have cashed out to buy another mansion, and this strategic asset, the most valuable thing I have ever owned in my life, would have been stripped away and lost to our family forever. You, Marcus, are a builder. You are patient. You understand structure, detail, and foundation. I spent my life telling you that you were not executive material for a local real estate firm because you are the only one capable of managing an empire of this magnitude. I had to play the part of the harsh, dismissive father. I had to make Tristan feel completely secure in his dominance so he would never, ever look twice at a worthless piece of land in the Yukon. I was wrong to make you feel small to keep the peace. It was a cruel strategy, but it was the only way to protect the land. I chose you for this because you investigate before selling. Do not tell Tristan. Attached is a list of trusted consultants, including Dr. Eris, my lead geologist. Build this the right way, Marcus. The world is about to change, and you are holding the keys. I love you. I read the letter until the ink blurred and ran together. My father hadn't thought I was worthless. He had entrusted me with his true massive legacy because I was the only son he actually respected enough to handle it. The multi-million-dollar real estate business in Chicago was nothing but a decoy. A shiny toy meant to distract a loud, arrogant child. This frozen dirt was the absolute crown jewel of the family. A cold, hard, unbreakable resolve settled deep into my bones. Tristan wanted to play the king of Chicago. Let him play. I was going to own the ground he walked on. I stayed in Whitehorse for 3 days and met with Dr. Eris, the brilliant, eccentric 76-year-old geologist my father had trusted with his life's biggest secret. We sat in a small, dingy diner. The air smelled strongly of cheap black coffee. Your father was a true visionary, Marcus, Dr. Eris said, tapping the thick stack of papers. The assay was based on old commodity prices. Today, with the massive geopolitical push to reduce reliance on foreign rare earth supply, your deposit is worth somewhere between $165 million and $180 million, but we need a shell company. We need top-tier international backing to extract this properly without getting legally drained by vultures. Dr. Eris introduced me to Harper, a high-level, utterly ruthless extraction consultant based out of a massive firm in Sydney, Australia. Over dozens of secure encrypted video calls taken from my cheap hotel room, we laid the intense legal groundwork for an empire. We established a private trust, layering it so deeply behind international corporate LLCs, Delaware holding companies, and offshore accounts that the name Marcus was entirely invisible to the public record. In exchange for handling the complex extraction planning and providing upfront capital, Harper's firm took a minority equity stake. When I finally flew back to Chicago, I was a fundamentally different man. On the outside, I was still driving my beat-up car and living in my cramped apartment. But inside, I held the absolute terrifying power of a billionaire kingmaker. I walked into my architectural drafting firm and calmly handed in my resignation to my boss, Mr. Sterling. I didn't tell him I was suddenly worth 9 figures. I just packed up my desk and walked out into the sunshine. Meanwhile, Tristan was completely imploding. Without my father's careful, pragmatic hand guiding the real estate firm, Tristan's unchecked arrogance took over like a wildfire. He overleveraged their core assets and took out massive high-interest loans to buy out competitors in Milwaukee right before the commercial market took a sharp, brutal downturn. I knew all of this because I hired a highly discreet private investigator to pull the public financial filings of the firm. Tristan was hemorrhaging cash at an alarming rate. To make matters infinitely worse, he had arrogantly refused to pay a major commercial construction contractor. That contractor had just filed a massive, crippling, multi-million-dollar lawsuit that threatened to completely freeze every single liquid asset Tristan had left. He was facing total, humiliating public bankruptcy. I maintained absolute radio silence. I blocked Chloe's phone number and all her social media accounts the exact moment I landed back from Canada. I was a ghost, but ghosts leave traces. It happened 3 months into my silent operation. I was sitting in a high-end coffee shop in downtown Chicago, reviewing a printed draft of the environmental impact study Harper had overnighted from Sydney. I stepped away to the barista counter for exactly 30 seconds, leaving the confidential folder closed on the table. I didn't know Blair, Chloe's toxic best friend, was in the same shop. By the time I turned around, she was standing right there, staring down at a single page that had accidentally slipped out. It had the estimated asset valuation printed boldly at the top, $165 million, Marcus Entity Holding Corporation. I quickly snatched the paper, my heart hammering violently. Blair looked up at me, a greedy, terrifying realization dawning on her face. Marcus, what is that? Are you laundering money? It's a typo on a hypothetical drafting project for a wealthy client. I lied smoothly, shoving the papers into my briefcase. I walked out fast, but I knew the damage was done. Blair was a venomous gossip. Within an hour, she would be calling Chloe. I immediately dialed Harper in Australia. We have a massive leak, I said, gripping the steering wheel. Accelerate the entire timeline. Lock everything down tight. I checked into a highly secure anonymous luxury hotel in downtown Chicago, paying entirely in cash. Over the next 72 hours, we aggressively accelerated every single legal filing. We moved massive assets through 3 different international LLCs, establishing blind trusts. By early Friday morning, my holding corp was completely dissolved on paper. Its massive assets were seamlessly absorbed by a massive, faceless international mining and investment conglomerate that we named Vanguard Apex. I was the sole majority shareholder and the chairman of the board of directors. On paper, I was still an unemployed drafter. In reality, I was a ghost holding the keys to a kingdom. Tristan desperately needed a miracle to save his company. And that was exactly when Harper, acting flawlessly as the senior VP of acquisitions for Vanguard Apex, sent a cold, formal email offering to review his entire portfolio for a potential buyout. Tristan took the bait instantly. He was far too panicked about losing his wealthy status to stop and question why an international conglomerate was suddenly interested in a failing Chicago real estate firm. The trap was set. But before the jaws snapped shut, Chloe came aggressively knocking on my door. It was a Tuesday evening. I had briefly returned to my Logan Square apartment to grab some specific documents. As I walked up the dimly lit stairwell, I saw a shadow standing in front of my door. It was Chloe. She was wearing a designer trench coat, holding a paper cup of expensive artisan coffee. "Marcus," she said, her voice dripping with artificial, practiced sweetness. "I have been trying to call you for days. I had to come wait for you." "Oh. I have not together." I looked at her, truly looked at her without the blinders of love, and felt absolutely nothing. Just a cold, sterile observation of a woman who had completely miscalculated her own life. "You do not live here anymore, Chloe," I said, my voice completely flat. "We have absolutely nothing to discuss." She stepped forward, forcing tears into her eyes. "Marcus, please, I made a terrible mistake. I was grieving your parents, too. I was so furious that your father treated you that way. I wanted you to fight for your fair share. And then Blair told me. She saw something about a corporate holding company with millions attached to it. Marcus, whatever it is, I want to be there for you. We were building a life together." There it was. The naked, ugly truth. Blair had run her venomous mouth, and Chloe didn't care if I was a criminal or a CEO. She just smelled the faint scent of massive wealth and came running back to secure her investment. "A piece of paper with a large number on it, Chloe," I asked quietly. "Is that what it actually takes to buy your loyalty back?" Her face flushed a deep, angry red. "I gave you 3 of the best years of my youth. If you have somehow stumbled into some real money, I deserve a piece of that security. You threw your diamond ring across a dining room table and called me a pathetic loser." I reminded her coldly, stepping past her to unlock my door. "You made your definitive choice based entirely on the financial information you had at the time. The accounting is closed, Chloe. You bet on the wrong horse. Do not ever attempt to contact me again." I stepped inside and slammed the heavy wooden door directly in her face, sliding the chain into place. I listened to her furious swearing and the rapid clicking of her expensive heels stomping down the stairs. The parasite had been detached. Update 2. The morning of the corporate meeting, the sky over Chicago was a brilliant, piercing blue. I woke up in my hotel room feeling a strange, absolute calm. I put on a bespoke charcoal suit that I had commissioned in secret. It was a stark departure from the cheap, off-the-rack khakis I had worn for a decade. I looked in the full-length mirror and saw a man who officially owned $165 million in strategic rare earth minerals, holding the total destruction of his childhood bullies neatly organized inside his leather briefcase. The meeting was set for 10 a.m. in a high-security, ultra-luxury boardroom on the 60th floor of a premier commercial tower. Vanguard Apex had rented the entire executive floor for the day just to make a psychological point. I arrived early and waited quietly in a private soundproof adjacent office, watching the live security feed on a tablet. At exactly 9:45, Tristan stepped off the elevator. He was sweating visibly. His navy pinstripe suit hung loosely on his frame. The crushing stress of the impending bankruptcy was physically eating him alive. He was flanked by his panicked corporate lawyer and his wife, Serena, who had likely insisted on coming to ensure her lavish shopping budget was secured in the new deal. They were greeted by Harper, who looked absolutely terrifying and completely in control in a sharp slate gray designer suit. She led them into the massive glass-walled boardroom. "Miss Harper," Tristan started, desperately trying to inject some of his old, booming authority into his trembling voice. "With your immediate capital injection, we can completely restructure the corporate debt within 2 financial quarters." Harper did not smile. She slowly opened a thick black leather portfolio. "Mr. Tristan, let us be entirely, unequivocally clear about why we are here. We are not injecting capital to save your brand. You are bleeding millions. Your expansion into Milwaukee was a catastrophic failure of judgment. Therefore, we are offering to strictly assume your toxic debt, settle the contractor lawsuit to avoid public humiliation, and aggressively purchase 70% controlling equity in your firm. You will step down immediately as executive vice president. You will hand over all operational control. We are buying you out because you have fundamentally failed to manage these assets, and you are currently out of options. Tristan's face turned a violent dark shade of purple. Serena gasped loudly, covering her mouth with her hands. 70%? Tristan choked out, slamming his hand onto the black marble table. That is outright insulting theft. I am the sole heir to Arthur's legacy. I demand to speak to the chairman of Vanguard Apex directly. Bring him in here right now, or we walk away from this table. Harper calmly adjusted her glasses. The chairman is here, Mr. Tristan. He has been personally reviewing your catastrophic financial filings all morning in the adjacent office. He is ready to see you now. Harper pressed a small flashing button on her desk phone. In the adjacent office, I took a deep, steadying breath. I picked up my leather briefcase, walked to the heavy oak door connecting the two rooms, turned the brass handle, and stepped fully into the boardroom. The silence that instantly followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that felt like the air pressure in an airplane cabin suddenly dropping to zero. Tristan completely stopped breathing. His eyes bugged out of his head, darting wildly from my tailored bespoke suit to Harper and back to my face. His brain was violently refusing to process the visual information. Serena let out a strange high-pitched squeak, gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. I walked slowly, deliberately to the head of the long table, the seat traditionally reserved for power. I placed my briefcase down, popped the brass locks with a sharp click, and pulled out a single heavily notarized sheet of paper. "Hello, Tristan," I said, my voice calm, steady, and echoing with absolute authority. "Marcus?" Tristan whispered, his voice trembling uncontrollably. What is this? What kind of sick, twisted joke are you playing right now? Are you a paralegal for them now?" Harper stood up, her voice slicing through the heavy air. "Mr. Tristan, you will address the chairman of Vanguard Apex with the appropriate respect. Mr. Marcus is the sole majority shareholder, founder, and chairman of this firm." Tristan physically recoiled in his chair. No, that is legally impossible. He is a pathetic architectural drafter. My dad left him a rotting, worthless wooden shack in the Yukon and $15,000 in travel cash. This is a massive scam. I slid the single sheet of paper across the smooth black marble table. It stopped directly in front of Tristan. "That rotting shack in the Yukon," I said softly, leaning over the table, commanding the space, "sits directly on top of one of the largest, purest, untapped deposits of neodymium and dysprosium in North America. Father knew about it for almost 40 years. He bought the land for $42,000 in the 80s. Today, conservative estimates value the mineral rights at $165 million. Tristan stared down at the paper. It was the executive summary of the massive geological assay, officially notarized with the staggering valuation highlighted in bright yellow ink. "Father knew exactly who you were, Tristan," I continued, my words hitting him like physical blows to the chest. "He knew you were a consumer. He knew you were loud, aggressive, and entirely reckless. He knew if he left you the Yukon land, you would sell it to the very first bidder to fund your country club lifestyle. He left you the real estate business because it was a decoy. It was a shiny, noisy toy to keep you distracted. He left me the true legacy because he knew I had the patience, the precision, and the quiet focus to build an empire. He left me the wealth. He left you the liability." Serena began to cry silently, her expensive mascara running down her face. She realized instantly that the limitless money was completely gone. "And now, Tristan," I said, tapping the thick legal contract sitting in front of Harper, "you have managed to bankrupt the decoy business in less than a year. You have a massive lawsuit you cannot possibly pay. So here is the deal on the table. You are going to sign that contract today. You are going to hand over 70% of the company to me. I am going to assume your toxic debt, and quietly settle the lawsuit so you don't go to jail for fraud. You will keep 30%, which will generate just enough dividend income to keep you out of a homeless shelter, but you will never, ever make a single executive decision again." Tristan was shaking violently. His lifelong arrogance was entirely shattered, ground into dust. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic, humiliating pleading. "Marcus, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "I am your brother. We are family. Family takes care of family. Remember? You can't just take the company from me." I looked at him and saw the exact same man who tossed a $100 bill onto my mashed potatoes while my fiancée left me. "You are absolutely right, Tristan," I said coldly, offering him the heavy silver pen. "Family takes care of family. That is exactly why I am not letting you go to federal prison for corporate negligence. Sign the paper." Tristan stared at the heavy silver pen. His lawyer gave a tiny, defeated shake of his head. There was no way out. Tristan picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so violently, he could barely hold it steady. He signed his name on the dotted line, his signature jagged and messy, sealing his fate. The Golden Child, the arrogant king of Chicago real estate, was officially a minority shareholder working for the quiet, invisible brother he had deemed entirely worthless. When the meeting concluded, I packed my briefcase and walked out, leaving him sitting in the ruins of his ego. But the reckoning wasn't quite finished. As the private elevator doors opened on the ground floor lobby of the massive skyscraper, I was met with another unwelcome ghost. Chloe was standing nervously by the main security desk. Blair had clearly tipped her off about the exact location and time of Tristan's meeting with the conglomerate. When Chloe saw me walk out of the elevator flanked by Harper and two massive corporate security guards, her eyes went incredibly wide. She practically sprinted across the polished marble floor. "Marcus!" she cried out, trying to grab my arm. One of the security guards stepped smoothly in front of her, entirely blocking her path. "Marcus, please, you have to talk to me. I know about the company. I know about the money. I was wrong. We can go back to how it was. We can plan the wedding." I stopped walking. I looked at her, standing there in the lobby of a building I practically owned, desperately begging for scraps of the incredible life she had violently thrown away. "Chloe," I said, my voice echoing clearly so everyone in the lobby could hear. "You did not leave me because of grief. You left me because you firmly believed my father left me a rotting shack and $15,000. You threw your ring and called me a pathetic loser in front of 6 people because you thought I had absolutely no financial value to you. You are not in love with me. You are in love with the chairman of Vanguard Apex. Have a good life, Chloe. Do not ever approach me again, or my security team will handle it." I walked out through the heavy revolving glass doors and stepped into the back of a waiting tinted black SUV. As the car pulled away, I watched Chloe collapse onto a lobby bench, burying her face in her hands, entirely alone. In the weeks that followed, I had my elite team of lawyers send Blair and Vance a formal, aggressive cease and desist letter, legally banning them from all Vanguard Apex properties and corporate events. Word spread quickly through their high society circles that they had deeply offended me. They were completely socially exiled. I also made a quiet phone call to my old architectural drafting firm and hired my former boss, Mr. Sterling, on a blank check contract to design my massive new corporate headquarters in Chicago. A few days later, while sitting in my new executive office, I received a secure, hand-delivered package from Mr. Harrison, the trust and estates lawyer. Inside the box was a small, worn green leather book and a handwritten note. "Marcus, your father explicitly instructed me to wait until you had successfully established the mining operation and secured the company before giving this to you. This belonged to your mother." I opened the package carefully. It was my mother's private locked diary. I sat alone at my massive polished mahogany desk, gently opening the worn leather cover. The fragile pages were filled with her neat, elegant cursive. As I read through the deeply personal entries dating back 3 decades, the final, most profound, and earth-shattering twist of my entire life finally revealed itself. My mother, Eleanor, was not the quiet, submissive, helpless woman who faded into the wallpaper. She was the absolute brilliant mastermind behind my entire inheritance. I read an entry dated October 1988. "Arthur wanted to buy a massive commercial block in Queens today. I told him no. I told him about a brilliant geologist I met at a university gala last month, a man named Dr. Aris. I convinced Arthur to fly to the Yukon to meet him. I subtly manipulated the conversation over dinner for weeks until I convinced him to buy the Tombstone property. He entirely thinks it was his own genius idea, but I planted the seed deep in his mind. That land, that incredibly valuable deposit, is for Marcus. I know it in my bones. Tristan is too loud. Tristan is too reckless. Tristan will completely destroy whatever legacy he touches because he has no respect for the foundation. I must play the part of the quiet, agreeable wife. I must let Arthur aggressively fawn over Tristan so that Marcus remains entirely invisible to them. Invisibility is the only way to protect Marcus's future from his brother's greed. I will let them think Marcus is weak so they never look twice at the true treasure." Tears, hot, heavy, and completely uncontrollable, finally fell from my eyes, dropping onto the old yellowed paper of the diary. My mother had known everything. She had seen my quiet nature not as a pathetic weakness, but as a profound, enduring strength that needed to be fiercely protected from my brother's destructive greed. She had intentionally sacrificed her own voice in the loud family dynamics, playing the fool to ensure that I would eventually inherit the earth. The warm chocolate chip cookies, the quiet whispers of encouragement, they weren't just simple motherly comfort. They were the highly calculated, loving actions of a guardian keeping her most valuable hidden soldier ready for a massive war he didn't even know was coming. 2 years have passed since that fateful day in the boardroom. The massive rare earth mining operation in the Yukon is now fully operational, highly efficient, and incredibly profitable. Tristan is still technically a board member of the real estate firm, which is now just a minor, almost forgotten subsidiary of my empire. I forced him to immediately sell the $15 million Lake Forest mansion to cover the remaining hidden tax debts he had selfishly accumulated. Serena divorced him 6 months after the limitless money dried up, taking exactly half of the pathetic scraps he had left. Tristan now reports directly to a mid-level regional manager I hired. He speaks very softly now. The blinding arrogance has been permanently burned out of him. I never moved into a massive flashy mansion. I bought a beautiful, highly secure, deeply secluded property in upstate New York, surrounded by massive towering pine trees. More importantly, I took $12 million of my first dividend payout and established a massive philanthropic foundation in my mother's name, the Eleanor Foundation. We are strictly dedicated to fully funding the higher education of quiet, overlooked, introverted students who excel in structural engineering, architectural drafting, and the sciences. I make sure the quiet builders of the world never have to feel invisible. Every April, on the exact anniversary of the day I first flew out there in the middle of a blinding snowstorm, I return to the Yukon. Last week, I made the trip. I rode the same model snowmobile out to the sprawling 250-acre property. The massive high-tech mining facility is completely hidden from view by the mountainous rocky ridge, but the old rotting gray wooden cabin remains exactly where it was. I absolutely refuse to let the corporate development teams tear it down. I unlocked the heavy rusted padlock, stepped inside the freezing familiar room, and built a small fire in the old iron stove. I sat on the dusty floorboards, looking out the small frosted window at the endless, breathtaking expanse of white wilderness. I was entirely alone, and I had never felt more at peace, more powerful, or more completely seen in my entire life. The people who loudly call you a loser, the people who constantly try to make you feel incredibly small, are almost always projecting their own massive, terrifying insecurities onto your quiet strength. Do not let loud, arrogant people convince you that your careful work has no value. The pathetic loser they laughed at is currently sitting on a multi-hundred-million-dollar empire. The pathetic loser did the careful work, and the pathetic loser is doing just fine. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out and allows us to bring you even more awesome stories. Thank you so much for watching.